Our main story tonight concerns electricity. It's like Oscar Isaac in that without its involvement, nothing in my house gets. It is hard to believe that we used to have to sell people on the idea of electric appliances with ads like this.
When you step inside the total electric home, you step into an entirely new concept in living, organized around electric centers, such as this entertainment center. The pride and joy of the man of the house is the weather control center, a center that puts you in charge of the electric heating and air conditioning and the electronic air filtering of the entire house.
Yes, the pride and joy of the man of the house is, of course, the temperature control system. Just invite all your thermo bros over on a Sunday, crack open a few brews, and watch the temperature for hours. Sorry, ladies, you wouldn't understand. It's a guy thing. Specifically tonight, we're going to talk about the power grid, the system of generators that produce electricity and the vast latticework of wires that get it to our homes. The grid is something that you probably don't think much about until it goes down, which unfortunately has been happening more and more in recent years.
Millions of Texans woke up to cold homes when the power grid failed.
This video shows lights going out as parts of the power grid failed.
Now, that power grid failed yesterday when Hurricane Ida ravaged parts of Louisiana.
The lights went out across downtown Detroit, cutting power to 1,400 buildings. Watch as the lights go out during a murder trial. These lawyers left in the dark.
Holy shit! When the lights go out during a murder trial, one of two things is happening. You've either got a power grid deeply in need of repair, or the murder victim has come back as a ghost and is seeking revenge. Either way, your priorities have shifted and it's time to focus on a much bigger problem. If it feels like there have been more outages than usual recently, that's because there have. By one estimate, from 2015 to 2020, the number of annual blackouts in the US doubled. And that is not good for numerous reasons, the most obvious being sitting around without power for any period of time absolutely sucks. What are you supposed to do without TV and the internet? Go outside? That's where snakes live, you idiot. So what else are you supposed to do? Read a book? That's where snakes sleep, you idiot. Why do you think we invented Kindles? But it is not just inconvenience. Losing electricity wreaks havoc on everything from sewage treatment plants to water purification systems and can be life-threatening to people who rely on medical equipment like ventilators and powered wheelchairs.
It's traumatizing. It's terrifying.
For Terhorst, an outage is more than just an expensive inconvenience.
This isn't like I'm going to lose a casserole in my fridge. You know, this is I may not be alive tomorrow.
Exactly. This is clearly about much more than just lost casseroles. Especially because, and let's be honest here, all casseroles are shit. They don't rely on specific ingredients so much as whatever's in someone's house. Casseroles are a sad smorgasbord of other leftovers desperately cobbled together to make a pathetic almost meal with names like tuna surprise and chicken I'm sorry. But to have a casserole left over, that is abandoned food that didn't make the cut 2 rounds in a row. I'm sorry. But if that is your only option, there are genuinely worse fates than being dead. And look, while things are bad now, they could get a lot worse in the future because the US has a goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050, which we absolutely must meet. But one study estimates that that's going to require a 40 to 60% increase in peak electricity consumption, which, when you think about it, does make sense. If we are switching to electric cars, cooking and heating, all that electricity is going to have to come from somewhere. And the truth is, if everyone suddenly had an electric car tomorrow, that might be great for the planet, but it could push our grid to its absolute limit. So tonight, let's talk about the power grid, the current state that it's in, and what we can do to fix it. And let's start with the fact that while I'm saying grid singular, our system is actually made up of 3 grids. There is the Eastern interconnection, the Western interconnection, and the Texas interconnection. It's basically like Major League Baseball in that there are 2 dominant groups and then arseholes in Texas who'd rather make up their own rules. And it all started in 1882, right here in New York, when Thomas Edison unveiled the country's first central power station on Pearl Street. Interestingly, it was then Edison's sometime rival, Nikola Tesla, who helped develop the technology enabling electricity to travel for long distances, something all the more remarkable given Tesla's, let's say, eccentricities.
Tesla suffered from bizarre compulsions, like his consuming need to rescue injured pigeons and nurse them back to health.
He has an infirmary for them right outside his bedroom window where he's trying to heal, some that have broken wings, broken legs. And in fact, at one point, he actually referred to one bird as his wife. And he said, when she died, the inventive spirit left him.
Huh. Did it now? Look, this isn't the point of this story or really anything, but if Tesla were alive today, I genuinely wonder which would upset him more. The fact that his name has been co-opted by history's first edgelord billionaire, or the fact that modern pigeons have just gotten so unfuckable. Listen, I said no, respectfully. Thank you for your attention, but I'm not interested. Please leave me and my friends alone. And when it was built, our power grid wasn't just a technical marvel, it was a civic one. Until the 1930s, electricity was a luxury, mainly for dense urban areas of the country. But after FDR created the Rural Electrification Administration in 1935, that began to change.
The REA was set up by the President and the Congress in 1935 to help farmers to get the power and light at a price they can afford. Here's the first thing women ask for after light itself. If you have ever ironed for an hour, you'll know why. An electric iron may not look important to a man, but it lightens one whole day's burden for a woman.
Yes, don't worry, ladies, with hubby naturally busy staring at the thermostat. You'll have plenty to do to occupy your time, like ironing his clothes or teaching a different woman to iron his clothes. And if there is still time, pressing the iron to your neck just for a moment, simply to feel something. You thought getting lights would make things better, but it only made things clearer, didn't it? Didn't it? Now, in the end, we wound up with 600,000 miles of transmission lines and around 5.5 million miles of local distribution lines, like the ones that you might see outside of your house, all of which form our modern electrical grid. It has been called the supreme engineering achievement of the 20th century, which is not to say that it is completely invulnerable. Of course not. When you string wires in the air, they're going to be subject to interference from all sorts of things. A website that tracked disruptions found that there have been over 600 outages caused by squirrels, over 200 by birds, 53 by raccoons, and a number of others caused by everything from snakes to slugs. And let me just quickly say here, kudos, slugs. Out of everything on that list, you are honestly the ones that I underestimated. The nicest thing I can say about you is that on your best day, you look like sassy poop. But you really showed us something by disrupting our power, so once more, slugs, kudos. But it is not just animals that can wreak havoc. There have also been multiple balloon-based disruptions. And if you're wondering how on earth a balloon could cause a power outage, the answer is like this.
Oh, shit!
Excellent. Not one single note. I hope no one standing there was hurt, but honestly, even if someone was, it wouldn't be a deal breaker for me. But disruptions have always been an issue for the power grid. What makes it especially vulnerable now is a combination of 2 key factors. The first is old age. Most power lines were constructed in the 50s and 60s with a 50-year life expectancy, which they are clearly now well past. And the second is climate change, meaning there's now more danger posed by extreme weather like hurricanes, tornadoes, and abnormally hot or cold temperatures. And that combo of old equipment and new climate threats has been disastrous. The massive campfire in California a few years ago happened because there was a drought in the area, making it essentially a tinderbox, and in intense winds, some Pacific gas and electric equipment failed, and for a pretty infuriating reason.
This is the hook that killed 84 people.
Fuck. This is a problem.
That groove took about 98 years to wear in. It's not a defect. These hooks are what are holding the electrical lines off the ground. And PG&E's decision was simply just to let these things hang until they broke.
When this old hook did break, the power line made contact with the metal tower, showering the ground in sparks. That's how PG&E started the campfire.
Yeah, and let that be a lesson to you. You can't just keep something that old in place and expect it to keep working forever. PG&E basically took the same approach to their equipment as Democrats did with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and in both cases, it didn't end well. So basically, we've got a power grid built in the 20th century that is not equipped to deal with the needs and stresses of the 21st. And if you're thinking, well, okay, let's upgrade it then, you're absolutely right, but that is also a massive undertaking because there are a lot of fixes, both small and huge, that the power grid badly needs. The small ones we don't have time to get into tonight, like in microgrids, as well as better storage capability so that how we generate doesn't go to waste. But we're going to focus on the huge one here. Because our shift to renewable energy is going to require a fundamental shift in what our grid looks like. One of the few benefits of fossil fuel plants is that you can put them anywhere. That is why most are located near densely populated areas close to the people that they serve. But you can't just replace every coal plant with a wind farm because that is not necessarily where the wind is strongest. And that fact alone changes everything.
This is a model created by Princeton, mapping out possible places in the continental US where wind and solar projects could, in theory, be built. Aside from some offshore wind farms, it's mostly in the middle of the US. Another study found that these states have most of the wind and solar potential, yet the people living there would only make up 30% of the electricity demand. In a decarbonized future, we're going to need to get electricity from here to here.
Right. And you probably don't even need me to tell you why this is going to be an uphill battle, because as soon as you saw that graphic and realised updating the grid was going to require a Princeton researcher telling a Midwestern farmer, we need to build something in your backyard so someone in California can power their electric car, you already called the next 8 election cycles for Republicans. But there is actually some good news here, because we've already made considerable progress in building out renewable energy power sources. Last year, for the first time ever, renewables like solar, wind and hydropower accounted for the largest portion of new generating capacity. And that is good not just for consumers, but in many cases for the communities where those facilities are built. In 2019, wind energy projects alone provided $706 million in land lease payments to rural landowners. So entire towns and areas can benefit from the money and the jobs renewables can bring, as this mayor in Wyoming can attest.
My personal belief is it provides money, it provides jobs, taxes. And then I look at the towns that they're by and just think of what people have that they wouldn't have had. A lot of infrastructure, police cars, those kind of things. When I look at a wind farm, all I think about is cha-ching.
And that's great. Well, to be clear, when you look at a wind farm, you can't think cha-ching because that's the cash register noise. I know you're trying to make a different point, but this is important too. Wind farms go fwoom, fwoom, fwoom. That's how wind farms go. A cash register goes cha-ching. A solar farm goes tss. A cat on the day everyone forgot its birthday goes meow. A horny cartoon wolf goes auga. And again, wind farms go fwoom, fwoom, fwoom. Just so we're clear about how things go. So the physical generation of renewable energy isn't really the problem here. The key issue is the transmission of it. Basically, how do you get that energy from where it's made, like a wind farm in Wyoming, to where it is needed, which could be 1,000 miles away? And that brings us to transmission lines, because they are at the absolute heart of our grid, and we're going to need a lot more of them, partly because, due to limitations of our aging transmission infrastructure, in some places, we actually have more electricity than we have the capability to transport. For instance, in Vermont, they had to put a moratorium on new solar and wind projects because the transmission lines couldn't carry any more electricity. So building out newer, higher capacity lines is crucially important. But so far, we haven't done nearly enough, and that is for a couple of reasons. And the first big one is location. Stringing power lines out across the country is a logistical nightmare. Unlike interstate gas lines, which only require approval from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, with power lines, you must secure the buy-in from multiple state and local agencies in every state you pass through, alongside all the individual landowners whose property you need to use. And look, there are legitimate reasons for people to not want power lines in their backyard. For instance, if it disrupts their farming operation, or goes through environmentally sensitive areas, or cultural or sacred sites for Native Americans. Other objections are simply aesthetic. The fact is, high voltage lines capable of carrying more electricity require bigger towers than their predecessors, and some people just don't want to see them. This is such an issue that some countries have actually made efforts to beautify their towers. In Hungary, they decided to build ones that look like jesters. In Iceland, they proposed these designs for a project called Land of Giants. And in Argentina, there is Colosso, the giant transmission line robot. At night, Colosso lights up and can even smile and wink. And look, I get the smile part. You want Colosso to come off as friendly so children aren't terrified of the giant electrified robot with glowing monster eyes. But why does it need to wink? What is it trying to communicate there? Is it coming on to us? Because I feel the same way about Colosso as I do about that pigeon. Never in a million fucking years. No, thank you. Please stop looking at me like that. It's making me uncomfortable. It's my friend's birthday. We're just trying to give her a nice evening, although I will keep the Long Island iced tea. Thank you. And good night. And the thing is, local opposition can be very effective in killing transmission line projects. A few years back, a company proposed plans to build 16 miles of new lines through Pennsylvania. But local landowners formed a grassroots group to push back, even releasing videos like this one to detail their objections.
I understand everybody needs electric, and everybody has to have electric. I wouldn't want to be without electric, but from what I understand, you know, this is only going to help people in Western PA, Maryland, and Virginia. And what's it doing? You know, I mean, I chose to live here, and they chose to live there. So don't make your problem my problem. That's how I feel.
Okay, I mean, that is a little bit maddening. The mirrored sunglasses definitely don't help, but it's a lot more than that, because I do get I don't want this on my land. I really do. But to make your argument, I don't want this here if it'll only help someone there, just makes you sound like a dick. Also, if we don't upgrade the grid, absolutely everyone is going to have problems, including you. It's like saying, don't make your problem my problem when your neighbour's yard is full of bears. Sure, but when it gets over that fence, guess what? It's your fucking problem now too. And when you consider all the hurdles transmission projects have to clear, it is no wonder it can take up to a decade to get new ones approved, if they're approved at all. And this can make it harder to bring renewable energy onto the grid in the first place. Fewer than a quarter of proposed energy projects like solar and wind actually ever make it to commercial operation because of transmission hurdles, and that is really not good. Now, the second big obstacle to overcome here is cost, because the truth is, this won't be cheap. One study projects decarbonising our power grid could cost $2.5 trillion over the next decade. And to put it mildly, not everyone is on board with spending that money. When Congress was considering the Clean Future Act, a bill that would, among other things, provide for expanding our transmission system, Representative Bill Johnson absolutely refused to entertain the notion that it could possibly be worth it, and would not back down.
Whether the American people are stuck picking up this tab via higher taxes or rate increases on their utility bills, can you honestly say that they'll be receiving a return on their investment?
As you look at the cost benefit for the health and safety of communities.
No, what's the return on investment? What is the return on investment? They're making a monetary investment with their taxes or their rate increases. What is the return on their investment?
So the return on the investment is access to clean energy, it's access to...
No, that's not a return on investment. A return on investment is a monetary thing. That's why you make an investment.
Okay, a few things. One, shut up. Two, if you let her talk for more than 2 fucking seconds there, she might have told you that many studies have found that it is cost effective. For instance, a federal lab looked into expanding transmission lines across the country and found that such a project could return up to $2.50 in benefits for every dollar of cost, which is, as an arsehole might put it, a return on a fucking investment. But look, set that aside. Set aside also that blackouts can cost us a lot of money, as the people of Texas will tell you after what happened to them earlier this year. There are also many benefits here that are not purely monetary. A cleaner grid helps combat climate change, meaning that maybe your grandkids won't die in weekly lava hurricanes, which does seem pretty worthwhile. Framing this purely as a matter of net profit is so weird. It's like saying, what's the return on investment in funding the fire department? How much money do we make off that? Well, I guess technically none, but if your house is on fire, someone will come with a hose to put it out. Plus, we get those sexy firefighter calendars full of oiled-up fire hunks, so we get to be safer and hornier. I'd call it a win-win. And look, I admit, this is going to require a lot of compromise and flexibility from all of us. But there are ways to overcome the hurdles that I've described tonight. When it comes to transmission line location, we can ease people's concerns, not necessarily by going full creepy colosso here. We don't have to be winked at, but we can make sure that people are compensated fairly for the use of their property and place lines, to the extent possible, on already disturbed lands like along railroads and highways. And when it comes to cost, we are finally making some progress. The infrastructure bill that passed the House this week devotes over $65 billion to improve the power grid, with a portion going directly to transmission upgrades and expansion. It is a good start, while also being not nearly enough. But the key thing going forward here might be to start thinking about this differently than we currently are. Because for far too long, whenever we've experienced blackouts, we've tended to think of it as the power grid failing. But the truth is, it's not failing us. We are failing it by asking it to do something it was not designed to do in conditions that it was not designed to handle. So we need to act boldly and quickly, as if both our lives and our shitty casseroles depend on it. And if we do this, if we manage to properly upgrade our power grid, it will genuinely be one of the biggest accomplishments of the 21st century, and one definitely worth celebrating. Perhaps, I don't know, with some balloons, you know? Balloons are always fun, aren't they? They lift... Oh, shit! Oh, fuck! Oh, shit! Oh, shit! Oh, no. Oh, hold on. I'm okay. That's our show. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Good fuck! Good night. Thank you. That's it. Which way is... I'm gonna go this way. No. Shit, it's over here. We'll be back next week. We'll be back next week.
Follow.
I have nothing more to give.
Speed. Oh.
I don't know why conservatives are so short-sighted when it comes. I don't know why conservatives are.
Of Human Events Daily, Jack Posobiec.
Yes, exactly. These are OGs. These aren't Vipers. These are OGs.
Please.
These aren't Vipers. My brother found them in my parents' closet. We've had them since the 90s.
Welcome back to the stage, Stephen Bonnell. And my man who just hit 150,000 subscribers, the Sean Fitzgerald. And host of the news and why it matters from Blaze TV, Sarah Gonzalez.
Sarah, I feel like your shoes need their own introduction.
I was hoping that NASA could see them from space when I was walking here. It was my goal.
I think you're giving Nico a run for his money.
You know, someone's got to do it, so.
Well, thank you guys for being with us here today. I wanted to start off by saying something that I think is probably obvious to anyone who's at this conference. America is in the midst of an identity crisis. Vanity Fair recently described the controversy surrounding the 1619 Project, for example, as, quote, a fight over who will tell the story of this country and how we think of its identity. It seems as if we are to find any common ground, we might first start by seeing if we can even agree on what is our national story, what does it mean to be an American, what are our country's founding principles, and should they be seen as a source of unity or a source of division? Jack, if you'd like to start.
Wow, okay. You know, it's weird kind of thinking about this sort of like national identity stuff and national narrative, because it feels like every day when, you know, you're sort of in the front lines of, you know, news or breaking news or, you know, cases like Sean covers, you know, so many criminal cases that are going on, that because we've sort of merged the essence really of what our national ideas are, what our conceptions are, what we think of as important, versus just this sort of like dissembling of identity, right, in America. And I think that's the real crisis, is that we've lost the national identity. And somewhere along the line, through, you know, a lot of deconstructivist thinking, and really also through commercialization and, you know, hyper-commercialization, hyper-individualism, where you now have people that instead of identifying as maybe, you know, in the past they might have said, well, you know, I'm an American, but I'm also, you know, we were just talking backstage, a Bostonian, you know, or a New Yorker, or, you know, I'm originally from the Philly area, so like you're an Eagles fan, right? You know, and it just is what it is. And of course I'm saying that in Dallas, and my dad said
that's
that
brave.
My dad, of course, said he would give me $20 if I said that while I was in Dallas, so Dad, you owe me. But, right, we had these sort of identities, your religious identity, you know, you're Catholic and all this, but somewhere along the line, we started adding identities, and we added more and more and more and more, and now it seems like those new identities, you know, oh, you know, what shows do you watch? Are you a Marvel fan? Are you a Disney fan? Are you this? Are you that? What political team are you on? Well, I'm this, I'm that. And so you then start to identify as this label that you put yourself on. And it used to be that some of those identities were at least rooted under the, you know, sort of like umbrella identity of being an American, being an American citizen, what that meant. But it somewhere along the line, probably since the 90s, I feel like it's actually changed, and we're taking the newer identities and sort of forgetting about the older stuff.
Yeah, to double up on what he's saying, the phenomenon that you're referring to is actually called neo-medievalism. And it was like first written about in a book, or I first heard about it in a book called The Modern Mercenary. And it was talking about the impact of this on the battlefield, because we're relying more and more on contractors. And if you guys know your medieval history, like you would, as a member of society, you would swear allegiance to a lord, a king, and you would also have a faith. And it's like, what happens when your lord is in conflict with your king or in conflict with your faith? This would produce problems and contradictions that can rip societies apart. And we're seeing that not only overseas with our contractors, where we have people who are loyal to companies, their own nation state, their own faith, but we're also seeing that in the United States. Like all this like over-identifying and identifying with things that are in conflict with one another is bound to create these negative consequences. Because again, if you're identifying as something that is in conflict with like an American vision or in conflict with somebody else, or you have multiple contradicting identities, what happens when those conflicts are brought to the forefront? And I think that's what we're seeing in our society right now.
If I could, I would also just like to add too, I think just as people, as humans, we are tribalistic, right? Like if we look at our ancestors, we were all tribal. And so we have to have this common purpose, this common sense of identity, this common goal. And I think I would agree that we've completely lost sight of what that goal is. And I just think even if you look at in society, even if you look at a smaller subset of people, you look at a family. What happens to a family, a husband and a wife and children who disagree on what their common principles are, who disagree on what their common goals are? Does that family stay together? Absolutely not. And so I think that when you're looking at, how America has really shifted, and we've got these new ideas now, which isn't a surprise because of the indoctrination that's happening in all of these institutions that are teaching our children, teaching these people who are exiting college. When you're looking at that, it's no surprise that we've lost our sense of identity, but certainly if you are on the train that America needs to come back together, which I recognize there are two thought processes here, and one of them is we just need a national divorce because we're too far gone, and one of them is we need to come back together and this is how we're going to have to do it. But I would say if you are on the team of coming back together in America, there is absolutely no way we can do it with no sense of common purpose.
I would say that all of us suffer from a really bad bout of recentism. I think it's easy to feel that we have, right now in this moment in history, an incredibly unique fracture in what we would consider an American identity. But I would say that, one, there have been far worse periods of history in the United States. We literally went to war with ourselves over a fractured identity. But even more importantly, I'd say even in the founding principles of this country, with the Federalist Papers trying to bring together the 13th colonies, we've always kind of had this idea of, yeah, we're Americans, but we're not all just Americans. You've got people that live in different areas. You've got a divide between religious people of different factions. You've got divides between city dwellers and urban dwellers. You've got Midwesterners. You've got NFL fans. There's all these different ways that we've historically always kind of divided us. We've had slaves. We've had not slaves. We've had, Irish and Italian immigrants. We've had so many different groups of come into the United States and ultimately, hopefully, merge together. Now, I think we kind of disagree on what it means to merge. We use the phrase melting pot. We have a lot of different groups here. In some ways, we seem to be at strife with one another. But I think that part of the strength of the United States is we've always been, to some extent, pretty fractured. And I think that it's easy to feel, because of all of the unique problems we have lately, especially with social media, that we're in some unique point in history where our identity is fractured. And aside from the Civil War, aside from internment camps in World War II, aside from crazy college kids that were indoctrinated in the 60s protesting against things like the Vietnam War and civil rights, I think that we've always had a healthy amount of conflict in the U.S. identity. I think that we can do things to bring it together, but I think it's important to recognize that it's not unique that we feel fractured today.
Do you think, though, that it's the level of contempt that we have for one another, for people who disagree with us, is unique?
No.
That we're at a pretty high point of contempt? Because it's one thing to say, we're fractured, we have different cultures or different opinions and different beliefs, but I think it's another thing to say we also view people with different opinions as morally in the wrong, and we have contempt for them. Is that something that's new, do you think?
I don't think so. I think that we've had, historically, there have been huge conflicts between different groups of people in the United States, where we've seen, Irish and Italian immigrants were enemies of the U.S. or couldn't find employment in places. Union versus non-union workers, especially post-civil rights era, was a huge divide in terms of how, should unions be regulating themselves or should the federal government do it, a la the Civil Rights Act. I think we've always had some level of contempt for each other. I think that what's unique today in U.S. history is the amplification exists in a way that it never did before, which I could maybe say to some extent makes it a little unique. Because, a long time ago, if I hated Joe Schmo in my neighborhood, I hated Joe Schmo in my neighborhood. Maybe everybody in my neighborhood knew. If it was really bad, maybe my church knew. If it was really bad, maybe everybody in the union knew. But nowadays, the entire world can know in a heartbeat if I don't like a particular guy, and uniquely, the entire world can come down on that guy. Cancel culture didn't exist when news only spread as far as your newspaper traveled.
Right.
I would also say, I would also argue that that's why it is more fractured than in previous times, because as you said, the amplification of one voice can affect so many different people that they didn't even realize that they could affect.
I'm actually not going to disagree with him on that. Like, we literally had a mini civil war over the state of Kansas. I think that we've had worse times, and a lot of this like national divorce talk is doom and gloom. And I called it subversive nonsense on Twitter, and people got mad at me for it. But we've had divisions that are deep in this country that have led to conflict in this country. I think the thing that's different now is the way that we view the federal government. Like right now, we believe that when you elect the president, it's that person's job to impose their will on the rest of the country. Like before, we had more checks and balances, so you could have states that were kind of going in their own direction because you had specific roles for the federal government and specific roles for the states. So I don't think it's as bad as it's ever been. I think that is a little bit of catastrophizing for sure, but I think the way we view national politics is worse.
I think also to piggyback on the back of that real quick too, I think that a lot of it becomes a numbers game with the amplification as well. Let's say, for instance, I could show you every single day a new story of a horrific black on white hate crime or white on black hate crime. If I could show you one story every single day, would that even necessarily be a bad thing? In a nation of 330 million people, you're never going to have zero problems. You're never going to have zero crime. There's something called the Chinese bank robber fallacy, where I could theoretically show you 1,000 new Chinese bank robberies happening every single day, assuming that we're looking at all the Chinese people across the world, and it still wouldn't necessarily make it a trend or a bad thing. It's just when you have so many numbers of people, you're bound to be able to pick and choose the types of stories you want to tell, which can lead people into thinking that things are so much worse than they actually are.
So the biggest division today isn't necessarily even like political in the sense of conservative, liberal, or Republican, Democrat. The biggest thing is that we're living now in the United States through an era of regime politics. And there is, or there has been, really since probably 2015, 2014, a level of populist sentiment on both the right and the left that has, and I think rightly, targeted this regime of, and it's tied to the federal government, it's tied to the president, it's also tied to Congress, it's tied to many, many institutions throughout the government, or that work in hand with the government. The rise of essentially this administrative state that, and it was goes back to Wilsonian doctrine. This idea that universities and the academy would essentially borrow some of the sovereignty from our government and then be used to control, the decisions of the government itself, even though they're, of course, not elected officials. This was part of the German idea that the regime should exist separate from elected government, and that so that science and enlightenment and reason should be separated from the muddy, grubby world of politics. And so that regime has become more and more powerful. It has also been amplified by many of these factors, but because so many people have decided that it is not serving the people well, they're turning to candidates then, and again, this is both on the right and the left, that are actually in opposition to that regime. If you look at what happened in 2016, and then after that, you can see that the regime feels very threatened. This is one of the reasons that even though we had the social media amplification system, which arguably is still in place, they're doing everything they can to put these shackles and hammer down on anybody that really speaks out across these narratives when it comes to this, because the regime has the line of the regime, the inner party sets the truth, and that anything that stands in opposition to this must be rooted out. And any people, if they become rooted out because of this, must also be taken down. This, of course, leads to the arrest of Julian Assange. It leads to the investigation on James O'Keefe. It leads to the demonization of Tulsi Gabbard when she ran for president. Many of these other voices out there, and the entire anti-war movement, by the way, many of these voices, Chelsea Manning, for example, voices, right, that come out that say, I don't like what the regime is doing, are then destroyed, and they must thusly be destroyed because we're living through that era. So I don't necessarily think that it's all left-right. I mean, there certainly is a lot of that, but there's also a lot of this sort of up-down division that we're seeing as well.
So I want to get back to this question just quickly about the level of contempt that we feel for one another as a result of all this. I was reading a recent Brown and Stanford University study that reported that effective polarization, meaning the amount of negativity that a citizen feels towards political parties other than their own has increased dramatically in the United States in the past 40 years. And I agree with you. I don't think that it's necessarily organically a political kind of division. I think that's being manufactured. But in the past 40 years, people are now reporting more contempt, more negativity towards people in the other party. So if you look at people in 1960, for example, 4% of Democrats and 4% of Republicans said they would be unhappy if their child chose to marry someone of the opposite political party. By 2019, that figure was 45% of Democrats and 35% of Republicans said they would be unhappy if their child married outside of their political party. What are the factors specifically, if there are any factors like social media that are making this a uniquely contemptuous time for people with disagreements? What are those factors? Could we agree on what some of those are?
Well, I would say that we've known for a long time, I mean, if you guys read The Righteous Mind, Jonathan Haidt's book, that it's Haidt, but I like to call him Hate, because that's how it's spelled. If you read his book, that the left has hated the right for a long time in this nation. And one of the unique things, and they've done this through surveys where the left literally can't understand, the further left you are, the worse you are at guessing the values of right-wing people. But one of the things that's happened that's become interesting is now we have the right hating them back. It used to be a situation where the left thought you were evil if you were on the right wing, and people on the right just thought you were wrong or stupid, and they would try to convince you. But now we're seeing this almost, it's taken decades. We're seeing the right push back, and I don't know if that's due to social media. I don't know if it's due to the fact that, for decades these people are telling you that that they hate you, and you can only go for so long saying, oh, they're just ignorant, and now people are like, all right, I hate you back. But I think the right's polarization, or their more vitriol for the left, that 35% number is, it's still lower, but I think that's relatively new.
I think as well, a lot of this, to kind of use my theory of the regime on this is fomented, right? This is fomented on both sides to keep them pitted against each other, to really sort of occlude what is actually happening in this country right now. So you'll see many times we've seen federal agencies or agents of national security teams go in and then implant informants in things like Black Lives Matter or other left-wing groups. You're starting to see it now in this Boogaloo movement, which it seems like it was almost completely created by the federal government, as well as people that are more associated with these militia groups, these 3%ers, Oath Keepers, and various other groups that are associated with things that happened throughout 2020 and early 2021. And so this type of anger and polarization is fostered by the regime because they are seeking to push what's essentially known as a color revolution. Now, color revolution is something that, had you been in Eastern Europe, or if you had been following the events of the Arab Spring, you would see how different regimes or pockets of regimes or groupings of regimes are using these tactics to be able to achieve geopolitical primacy. You're seeing that, we saw it in Ukraine, you saw it across the Arab Spring, you saw it really, pick a country in Eastern Europe, it's happened there probably a few times. The only difference is these types of forces aren't really used in the West. And so through those instances, any one of these polarizations, and then specifically acts of violence, has to be filtered through the lens of the regime narrative. So whether it's the events of January 6th, whether it's the events of Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, George Floyd, whatever it is, it's filtered through that narrative so that the regime can achieve its ends.
I feel like the regime has always done, if we look at it from the regime lens, I feel like that's an unsatisfactory explanation, because the government has always done weird stuff. Whether we're talking Tuskegee with the experiments on black people and syphilis, whether we're talking the FBI informants that were embedded into people like the Black Panthers in the Civil Rights era, I think the government's always been up to kind of funny business, whether we're talking about MK Ultra. There's all sorts of different projects that the government has done, arguably some that have been worse in the past than what exists today. I feel like for a slightly less conspiratorial view, rather than regime versus the people, I think that something that happens, it's kind of in line, I guess obviously I favor my paradigm, with the amplification of stuff, is something that's happened is we have become hyper-nationalized in our political landscape, And we're kind of sold this illusion that there is a unifying Democratic Party and a unifying Republican Party, and that is absolutely not true. A Democrat that exists in West Virginia has absolutely nothing in common with a Democrat generally that exists in like California. And we have this issue where when and it doesn't surprise me that people might view each other as worse, but that's because if I were to ask if I were to ask a Republican in any of the Bible Belt, what do you think of when I say like Democrat? You're not actually thinking of another Democrat that might exist in your city or on your state legislature or your city council or whatever. You're thinking of AOC. You're thinking of the Justice Dems. You're thinking of President Biden. You're thinking of Obama. And then much the same if I ask a Democrat, like, oh, well, who are you thinking about? You know, and they're thinking like, you know, Jim Jordan, or they're thinking Donald Trump, or they're thinking of, you know, all of these national level Republicans. I think that when we kind of lose, I think that when we look at our unique political landscapes that exist on a local level, you're going to find a lot of overlap in values. If you go to a particular city election, it's pretty rare that you're going to have an ultra left-leaning socialist running against like a far-right Trump supporter. Usually there's going to be a lot of shared values in between the two of these people, because that's typically how local politics works. But I think when we become so nationalized in all of these conversations, we kind of forget, like, you know, not to call anybody out, but like, who is on your state legislature, or who is your mayor, or who is your governor sometimes? People don't even know, you know? But we sure can name the last thing that AOC tweeted, or the last fight that Ben Shapiro got in with some congressperson, because the national level politics is all we see. And when that is what you see, I think because we see the most extreme of that, you tend to think that the people of the opposite political party living near you embody the values of the most extreme figures you see from halfway across the country on Twitter or television.
I kind of want to add to something, Sean, that you said, which was, I know you said, you know, finally the right has said, I hate you back. And I do just, maybe it's semantics to some people, but to me, I would just like to, in my opinion, tweak that a little bit, which is, I think that you can only poke the bear for so long until the bear finally says, I'm done, right? So what I have seen, it has not been so much that you hate us and we hate you back, but it's just, we have been disrespected for so long. We have been told that we are white supremacists, that we are this, that we are that we are transphobic, that we are homophobic, all of the phobics for so long that you can only live like that for so long before you turn back and say, you know what, I'm kind of done. I just don't really care to live like this anymore. And I do think that it is an important distinction, because in my experience, I haven't seen that hatred coming from the right, but more so just, okay, I'm kind of tired of this. I'm done with the energy. I just don't want to play the game anymore.
Oh, for sure. And I do think a big driving factor is the Obviously, race is very divisive, and no matter what most people say about how they don't mind being called racist at this point, it's something that bothers you because that's one of the worst things to call somebody. It's close. The closest thing to it is calling somebody a pedophile. Like, that's how serious the allegation is. So ever since we've the left has really, and you could track their mentions of white supremacy on Google Trends, ever since they've ratcheted up that rhetoric, we've seen the response from the Republicans, because they were always nasty. They always hated George W. Bush. They would call him an idiot. They hated Sarah Palin and all that. But we're like, whatever, that's politics. We understand. We don't like Hillary Clinton because she kills people. We get it. But once everybody became deplorable white supremacists and all that, and you just see this everywhere, and it's not the full left. Progressives make up 7% of the population, and these are the people most likely to be ratcheting it up, but people just fall in line and they comply with that loud 7%. And I think that's led to the right seeing the left as that and realizing that even if I know intellectually you don't hate me on the left, you're willing to stand idle while my name gets dragged through the mud, or my family's members' names gets dragged through the mud, because you're not willing to call it out because we've glorified the allegations of racism in this country. So I do think that has led to, that is the poking of the bear, and that's where we went too far, or they went too far.
We would also probably be remiss, or I would probably be remiss, if we didn't bring up the one area of polarization that's even larger than political right now. And that has to do with the way that society is becoming polarized on the issue of COVID-19, specifically on vaccination status versus unvaccination status. And you've got people now within the federal regime that are coming out and saying that if you are unvaccinated, you are the problem, you are scapegoated. Jacinda, the Prime Minister from New Zealand, was asked about this, and they said, are you creating a two-tier society where there is one rung of citizens that has less rights, right? They are second-class citizens with less rights than the people who have become vaccinated. And she said, yes. Yes, we are. We positively are doing this. And so whether or not your vaccination status is this or that, whatever, listen to your doctor, do your thing. But I'm not going to sit here, and I don't think any of us should sit here, and look at a country that becomes so incredibly polarized where we take a group of people, it is a smaller group of people, by the way, and then blame all the ills of society on them. This has been done throughout history when regimes become decrepit, when they feel threatened, and they come up with these scapegoat targets, and it never ends well. It always ends horribly.
I think there's something else to that, Jack. And actually, we talked about it on my show yesterday, which was, it was a comment that I had just gotten. And I hear this all the time in regards to COVID-19, which is the idea that someone had said, well, true patriots care more about public health than they do about individual freedom. And I hear that so often, is that people are like, you are not patriotic if you don't care about the common good. If you care about the common good, you will do this for your neighbor. You will wear the mask, you will get vaccinated, you will do all these things. And I really do hear that so often, that there are these two lines of thought that, like, well, you're not patriotic unless you put the greater good first. Even though when you look back at the collectivist mentality, that's never been what America has stood for. That's never been what America was founded on. And yet somehow here we are finding ourselves with these people who have been conditioned to view their freedoms as selfish. And I think it's a really dangerous time.
I think we've absolutely been collectivists in the past. We literally had a draft where we forced young men who were 18 years old to go overseas and fight to the death in wars. I would say that we had an office of censorship around World War II, where we were literally disallowing people casting baseball games to talk about the weather because we didn't want, foreign enemies to have any sort of information coming into the United States. I think that there's always been like a healthy balance between, like these are our private liberties, but as we tell our children, with, more freedoms comes more responsibilities. You want to drive, that's fine. You can't drink and drive. If you want to, stay out late, that's fine, but you've got to call and check in. Like, it's always been historically, whether we're talking to our children or our fellow countrymen, that with additional freedoms is always necessarily going to come additional responsibilities, because you just can't have an anarchist society with everybody running around doing as they will and saying, we have freedom, because freedom is really only as good as the people around you ensure it is, Like, you can have an ultimately free society that, at the end of the day, you don't have the ability to do anything inside. So whether that's a pandemic and you're immunocompromised and now you can't go anywhere because nobody wants to do anything to, take care of themselves or take care of you to make sure that you don't get sick, or, whether that's, driving on the road and other people are drunk driving because we decide, well, they can drunk drive and they get an accident, that's what we're going to punish them. I think that we always accept some level of limits on our freedom. If we want to say also that there's like a two-tier system being created between the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated, I guess we can say that, but that system was created a long time ago. We've had that for a long time. In order to go to public schools, and most
That's
private
not
schools
true. That's completely not true.
Wait, do you require vaccinations to attend most schools?
Did they check a vaccination status when we got into this theater? When you went to a supermarket? When you went to?
I would argue going to school is more important than going to the theater.
Most states have exemptions.
This is Motte and Bailey, right? We're not talking about those vaccines. We're talking about this vaccine.
And I'm just saying, if you to utter the phrase, we're creating a two-tier system between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, that's already existing.
There's a crucial distinction.
It's actually happening.
Absolutely. You cannot go to public schools and most private schools unless you are vaccinated, and you have to show a record of that.
I'd like to just correct, but on top of that, most states in this country offer a wide variety of exemptions for parents to fill out. I know because I do them. It's very easy. I go to my state's registrar, the Department of Health. I go fill out my information. They send me a form. I go get it notarized saying I don't want my children to be vaccinated for whatever reason I so choose, my personal conscience. I believe that it's New York and California who are the only ones who have done away with everything except medical, but medical still remains. So the idea that I can't send my kids to public school or private school unless they're vaccinated is absolutely untrue. I know because I do it.
There's an exemption process, though, for the COVID-19 vaccine as well, though. Yes, you're allowed to be tested, and you can show that you've been tested.
Aura stack, armor stack. And my armor is not near done. We need at least 500,000. Gonna get there someday. Oh, and Yeah, that's going to be like the budget version where it will start to feel nice. Oh, yeah, that is very budget. To be fair, but what am I doing?
Employers are not accepting that exemption. But I have a question. Do you believe, Stephen, that you don't believe that there's an attempt to use vaccine status to divide us in this country? You don't think that's happening?
I think at this point you could literally tell people to stop shitting in the streets and Republicans will pull down their pants and run up and down and do it. I think that people are looking for divisions in any possible place you can find it. I guess as an American citizen, I think that we have access to a wonderful society, but there's going to be some buy-in to that society. Whether it triggers people or not, like paying taxes is part of your obligation to society. You know, being a good neighbor is part of your obligation to society. Taking the bare minimum steps to ensure that you're not transmitting a deadly disease over and over and over again to other people is like the bare minimum step you can take in society. I think it's a fair.
But what does being a good neighbor mean, though? That means different things to different people, right? Like when you're saying, but when you're saying it's my responsibility, public health is my responsibility. It is not my responsibility.
It is very tanky though. Very tanky.
I have not forced people to go and make
But the
themselves.
damage is not there yet.
Contagious.
Damage is
But
not
it
done.
makes people more prone to getting COVID, which means that so if you
I will die here.
If you have made yourself have comorbidities to something that is going around,
But I can't
how is
kill
that
them. I
my
can't kill them.
responsibility?
I mean, we can talk about reasonable steps you can take to prevent one from
did
getting
so
sick.
fast.
I don't know if I would say that like every single
But that
person.
wasn't your argument. Right, people don't take care of their own bodies.
I don't think we can say every single person has to live an optimally healthy life. Otherwise, it's your responsibility.
Right, but that wasn't
when it comes to something like a vaccine,
By the way, can you guys see why I brought up vaccines? Because like this was kind of, we were kind of like just chilling up here, and then I was like, let's talk about something.
He wanted to make it interesting. Actually, this I think goes to your
We are
point.
going to now
Suddenly
speak of
it's
the vaccine. We are going to have a lively argument and discussion for your viewing pleasure.
Suddenly, it's very contentious.
Yeah,
okay?
I do have a point about that because you brought up the in order to
Motherfucker,
go to public schools, and true,
what
we
was
require
that?
most kids. There are exceptions to get vaccinated for public schools, but what do we require them to get
Oh.
vaccinated for? Diseases that are either more contagious than COVID and diseases that are more deadly for children than COVID. Like we don't require flu shots every year for kids to go to public schools, and COVID for kids in that age is about as dangerous as the flu.
Nor
like
did
if
we
you want to
require
compare this to a
masks.
smallpox vaccine, smallpox's fatality rate was 30%. It was a worldwide pandemic, or a worldwide plague on humanity. These two things are not comparable. So
I agree that we don't require flu shots, but if the flu was killing, 500,000 people in a year,
the flu kills more children than.
Wait, hold on. The flu fatality rates are nowhere near the SARS-CoV-2.
He's talking about for
We're talking about children because you brought up
But we're
schools.
not. But you don't get vaccinated just for children. I don't know why conservatives are so short-sighted when it comes to public health. You don't get shot just for the children. You get shot to protect their families, to protect their teachers, to protect other people in society. This is how vaccinations work. Vaccinations are not an individual protection measure. It is a societal epidemiological health prescription.
They are though.
Subject for a second. So I'm
dumb
curious,
fuck.
because we all seem to be,
They are,
at least I
though.
thought we were in agreement on several things until we got to this very
Motherfucker.
divisive issue of vaccines. But I'm just curious, do you believe that there's a concerted effort in this country to divide the populace along issues like race, for example, using race, for example, to divide us, using the vaccine to divide us, using partisanship,
I mean, I think the division is a byproduct of other goals. I don't think the goal is explicitly like we're going to divide with this issue and focus on it. I think that people have issues that they care about a lot, and then people end up being divided on it. So whether we're talking about people on the left dividing people with the coronavirus or Republicans dividing people with abortion, I don't think anybody's goal is to divide somebody with a topic. It's just you have things you care a lot about, and then you push it, and those topics end up becoming divisive because people disagree with them.
Look, I think people's uninformed nature leads to bad policy and authoritarian policy. We've seen the polling that a bunch of people in this country think that the hospitalization rate for COVID-19 is over 50%, over 30%. So, like, people think that COVID sends you to the hospital like smallpox. I understand why they're pressuring their governments to pass regulations to treat it like smallpox.
Russ Doe had a column in the New York Times where he was saying that you know, what if COVID was 10 times more deadly? And my response was like, well, yeah, then I'd be there with you, right? You know, that I would understand some of this stuff and we could take those steps, right? If it was as deadly as smallpox, then yes, certainly we would be using much more drastic measures. But, you know, when it comes to this, I find it very interesting that we argue more about the
it's going to take a long
effects
time.
of the steps that we're going to be taking on this, rather than, you know, for me, I've been a big, you know, proponent of understanding where COVID came from, understanding this process, the process, and looking into, you know, early January 2020, I was like one of the first guys in the country who was reading the Mandarin on various Chinese blogs, trying to figure out what the heck was going on in Wuhan, and then digging into the lab and everything else. And it's amazing to me how that, which really seems like something the country could unite on, and I don't mean to drive the conversation into this, that has been completely usurped by instead, no, we're going to have these divisive mandates. And it's amazing to me that when I see Joe Biden,
don't crash.
Every time he announces a mandate, it's because he's trying to distract from something that's just happened. So Afghanistan falls apart. He announces he's going to push nationwide mandates. Then he has a political loss. He's suffering badly in the polls. He announces that OSHA is going to fund, just this last week, right, is going to push the new rule. 49 pages, the thing comes out, everyone's going to be fined. And so everybody then goes and talks about the mandates. At the same time, you're seeing the ordering of vaccinations for children in New York State. And so it's looking at it again, like, because I do look at everything through the regime, not everything, but I look at a lot of this through the politics of, or the lens of regime politics, that you can really see that a lot of what the regime, and to your point, you know, I do think that this is something that a lot of people care about, but I can see that the way that the timing of these orders is really being pushed to help benefit the regime in terms of the larger narrative war.
I would also say that the idea that I am supposed to put my child at risk, because there is risk to both things, right? If you want to say there is risk that my child might be one of the few who gets COVID-19 and has some sort of long-term complications or, you know, passes away. There's risk there. There is also a risk when you are talking about a medicine, a drug that you are injecting into your body. And I just think the idea that I am supposed to put my child at risk for a stranger at the supermarket that I don't even know, I am beholden to some stranger in society more so than I am to my own family, is absolutely preposterous.
I mean, you can play that on both sides, though. Maybe you think you don't want to put your child. I wouldn't want to put my child at risk being in a classroom with your child. I don't want my child to contract something that they might have gotten.
Home.
I don't want.
Then
no,
stay
no,
home.
No, but your child is the problem, not mine, because I'm willing for my child to take the minimum number of steps
that
necessary.
You don't have.
I'm willing to have my child take the minimum steps necessary to make sure that they're safe and they protect their classmates as well. I'm guessing you're probably against children wearing masks too, or other types of.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so
it's abusive.
It's abusive.
So, but the problem is,
my child never wore a mask.
If my child catches something or gets something because another student isn't taking the minimum preventative risks, and we know that children are pretty tenacious when it comes to the coronavirus, they're probably not going to die. They're probably not even going to get seriously ill. But if they bring that home to grandma and grandpa, and now grandma and grandpa died because you decided to fill out a bullshit exemption for your kid because you didn't want them to get a vaccination because of a stranger in a supermarket, right? That's just absolutely absurd.
Okay, so hold on. So here's the thing. It's if your mask works, if your vaccine works, if your child's vaccine works, you shouldn't have to worry about my child. My child is not a threat to you.
I don't.
If you believe in your science, then believe in your science. You're fine. And if you don't, and you're worried about my child, what does that say?
I cannot understand how conservatives are so bad with probability. It absolutely blows my mind. If your seatbelt works, why do you have an airbag? If your airbag works, why does your car crumple? If this all works, why do you have other drunk drivers? Like, you can make the dumbest face one in the world, but this every single thing
not
that
at all
you do,
a great
absolutely
analogy.
is completely one-to-one in comparison. The things that you do epidemiologically is not we're going to do this one thing and 100% prevent the virus, and if we don't, it's a failure. It's all the little steps that you take on the way. If everybody social distance and mask, you prevent the spread this much. If everybody did that and then got vaccinated, you prevent it this much. If everybody stays home, this is how it works. All of it is probabilistic. This idea that, well, you've got something that increases your probability by this %, so now nobody has anything. It's the dumbest look at.
So if you are living in a free society, if you choose to live in a free society and you choose to go into society, you are accepting the risk that you will get a transmissible disease every time you exit your home. That is how a free society works. You will never vaccinate every virus out of the population. You will always have sickness, and we will always transmit diseases because that's just the way a free society works. So if you are worried about what everyone else is transmitting, you are the one who should stay at home.
So
because
we don't
how
live-
we've always lived, we've always transmitted flu at the supermarket. No one's been worried about that. We've always transmitted diseases.
We don't
Yeah,
live
that
in a
might have been a bad idea,
society.
dumb
We live in a
fuck.
democratically elected representative government. So if most of the public decides that these mandates are indeed necessary for you to participate in society, then you are the one that is going to have to abide by what the public
So
tells
what
you.
if the majority
That
doesn't
is how
believe
our
that?
government works. That's how our
Let me
system
ask
works.
a
We're in a
question.
democratically elected republic. That's how it works.
How do you define rights? I'd like to know how you define rights. Like this will actually get us back on topic a little bit. Where do rights come from? Because it sounds to me...
There's a whole other conversation on, do we believe rights come from God? Do we believe they come from government? Do we talk about positive rights
But it sounds
versus
to me
negative
like
rights?
you're saying it's within your right for the majority to dictate force against others. So, for example, if the majority of people say we should enslave people, then we should enslave people.
So
Is
we
that
can
what
have,
you're saying?
we have edged out in our Constitution. There are going to be minimums, or there are going to be certain inalienable rights that we cannot take from other people, and that's up to the courts to decide,
Bodily
or us
autonomy?
to change the Constitution. Otherwise, right? You can say bodily autonomy you want, but vaccinations are required for children going to public schools,
Yeah,
right?
what we discussed
the point
that,
is that rights exist on paper. Okay, it doesn't matter what right we talk about if we can't leave our house because we're worried about something, or if we can't go. Now, I'm not saying that the coronavirus is so bad you can never leave the house. I'm just saying that in order for society to function, we don't all work in this ultimately free way. We have a responsibility to other people around us. Conservatives should understand this the best, because conservatives are the most local people that tend to participate locally in their churches, in their charities. They give more than liberals do. You guys should know this better than anyone else, and that in order for society to function, to be well lubricated, to not have a lot of friction, you have to have some minimum level of buy-in in terms of how you treat the people around you. One of the ways you treat people nice is by not volunteering as a bioterrorism weapon because you don't want to get vaccinated because of something that fucking Anderson Cooper said on CNN.
For someone who claims that conservatives have a hard time believing in science, you seem to not understand the idea that no one can spread a virus that they don't have.
And also, my rights aren't...
I'm not a bioterrorist weapon by going to the grocery store if I don't have a virus. Your assumption that everyone else you come into contact with, if they are not vaccinated, must have COVID is ridiculous.
But there's an increased probability.
No, but my rights are not subject to your inability to assess risk properly. You're talking about people afraid to leave their homes because of the coronavirus. You're talking about children being afraid to go to school, or parents afraid for their children to go to school. The risk is near zero. Also, when Biden was announcing the vaccine mandates and what he was proposing, he said breakthrough cases were 1 in 5,000. Breakthrough hospitalizations, again from the president, were 1 in 160,000. I think 1 in 160,000 is not enough to infringe on other people's rights. Jack said it earlier. If COVID was 10 times, 20 times more deadly and more deadly for children, we'd be having a different conversation. But we need to assess the risk.
You also wouldn't have to mandate it.
The answer to this is simple.
You wouldn't have to mandate it. People would go get it.
You vaccinate, everyone vaccinate, then you will plug into Zuckerverse, and in Zuckerverse we will all vaccinate each other multiple times a day. You'll be taking every new vaccine, then the pill comes out, the injections will continue until compliance has been achieved.
So, just to attempt to get us back on topic.
But there is there is a bigger question here, right? And I think we should separate the two over, like, are vaccines good versus should vaccines be mandated, right? Isn't that that's like two separate things, right?
Correct. I think it boils down to, do you believe, we'll have time for questions in just 1 second, but do you believe that the government,
be very quiet,
some people
audience.
phrase it
We don't
this
want
way,
to hear from
do
you.
you believe that the government owns individuals, or individuals own themselves? And is this a part of our American narrative that we've lost? Like, what did the founders intend when they talk about liberty? When I asked the first question on this panel, like, how do you define the founding principles if you were to explain them to a child? Like, what is America? What does it mean to be an American?
Good luck.
Does anybody have an answer for that? How do you define
There are no rights. Rights come from me if I give them to you. You're
What's
not
that?
allowed to have these silly
Why is he
things.
why is he speaking like the German?
No rights. The government has rights, and you are
Yeah, it's
children
kinda low.
who will obey what we tell you. We might make you think you have a right to vote for this approved candidate or that approved candidate, or have arguments
Oh, no, stop
from
it. Oh
this
my
approved
God.
source and that approved source, asking this approved question or that approved question, but at the end of the day, you have nothing. This is silly.
This is definitely not the
Jack
Buller
has the
one.
weirdest filibusters.
Why did you do this, Howard?
I was gonna say, I think fundamentally, like the American identity, like we should all have an understanding of what like the principles of America mean. Like I want to move past that. I think fundamentally what separates Americans from other peoples in other nations around the world is that we have like an optimistic mindset, and this is in part due to our structure of government. Like people always say, we're the first nation to put freedom of religion in the Constitution. We're also the first nation to put intellectual property rights in the Constitution, because the idea of America is that if you invent it, you own it,
This
you
build
take
is
it as
definitely
far
not
as you
made
can
for
take
this.
it, because it's your adventure. And we see the American optimism in different aspects of our lives. Go watch the ending of a British sitcom. The joke is always on the main character. American sitcoms always uplift the main character. This is because fundamentally we're an optimistic people, and we shouldn't lose the fact that we're an optimistic people. The Hollywood ending, when Hollywood used to reflect our values more, is a thing because that is reflective of our American values, that we want the hero to win. We want, like, we're rooting for good over evil, not to make it so dramatic like that. That's not the same in other nations, and I see us becoming more cynical, less optimistic, talking about subversive things like national divorce, just giving up, packing it in, dividing up the country as if that's not going to lead to a civil war. So we got to hold on to that optimistic ideal, because that's what America is. It's the adventure, not the result.
There's a great kind of like it's one of those memes that's out there, and it's it's talking about the differences in literature. So for different societies, and so the stereotypical American, it's it's like, I will die for liberty, right? And then it's got the British, British literature, I will die for honor, and then the French, of course, I will die for love, and then the Russian is like, I will die. And it's sort of this like very cynical, very Eastern, kind of thinking. And, I do feel though that we have lost kind of that American sort of sense of, if I have liberty, it's not just liberty for, the sake of being able to do whatever I feel like. It's liberty, what you say, to achieve those optimistic goals, to achieve those optimistic ends, because we don't want to be stuck in the pod eating the bugs. We want to be adventurous and take risks. If everyone here, right, unless you're native, your parents came, or if you are native, if you go back, that your parents came or your ancestors came on a dangerous and arduous voyage to get here. So we were self-selected to be part of this experiment, over time. And I think we all do come from that stock. And so adventure seeking, we're in Texas, right? This is the home of the cowboy, right? What is the more American stereotypical archetype than the cowboy, riding out with, the 10-gallon hat and being on the range? This is the American figure. Now, like, I'm from Philadelphia, I'm not a cowboy, but that there is, a huge part of the American mythos that's tied up in that. And it's a figure that people strive to kind of emulate. And I think that we have lost, getting back to the original question, we have lost that as a country, totally lost that as a country.
I will say, just as a quick note, that your go-to example for like American values was what came from Mexican cowboys. I think that's kind of funny. But regardless of that, I think that we talk a lot about liberty in terms of what are we guaranteed on paper? What can we do on paper? I wish that the conversation would move past that, because it is so unbelievably boring to hear about how much opportunity you have on paper if you don't actually have the opportunity in real life. Like, it's when you can go to so many different countries across Europe and people have access to education, they have access to healthcare, they might have to wait in line for it, but they get it. When they have access to like actual opportunity, and then we brag, well, in the United States, you could go from selling crack to, being the CEO of a major company. I find those conversations wholly unsatisfying. I wish that we would talk more about how do we actually ensure that people have actual real access to opportunity, rather than jerking ourselves off about like, words on paper that don't mean much for a lot of the American public right now. We talk about how the public is like, in the United States, generally optimistic, and then, we try to use like British cynicism to say they want evil to win over good. I don't know if I agree with that. But if you want to look for optimism, look at like the millennial crowd that came up after one of the worst recessions in U.S. history. Or look at people right now that can't afford to move to another city to get a job. Or look at people that can't afford to go to college. Or look at people that feel like they have to live with their parents until they're 30 years old. I think that we have problems in this country that go past just the wording in the Constitution, and it seems like we're unwilling to come together to acknowledge that reality from the left and right, and actually like work to fix those problems.
I would say I think that we would acknowledge that there are problems that exist. I think that we would just disagree on the reason for the problem. Is I think the issue. I agree. I think it's, When my kids get that old, I sure as hell don't want them living with me, right? Like, I understand the problem of millennials having to live with their parents, but why is that? I would argue that we have a generation of people growing up who are entitled, who don't understand how to spend money.
This debate's not as fun
spend
as the
themselves
last
into
debate.
debt,
Am I right?
don't understand financial responsibility, and that those are the reasons driving what you just mentioned, right?
Where do they get those values
well, I'm
from?
not done, but as you're about to do, you would argue that it's something different, right? But what I'm saying is, I don't think that we disagree that there's a problem. We disagree on the root cause of the problem.
I just want to point out that one person clapped for, there is no opportunity, and I found that hilarious.
No, I think you're right though when you say that it's a knock on conservatives, and I think it's a good one. Like I give you credit for saying it. That conservatives will just kind of like be in this sort of like you're stuck in one of those C++ routines, if you know anything about coding, where you're just like the Constitution, the Constitution, the Constitution over and over, whereas for huge swaths of the country, they're saying, look, my job went overseas and my town died because the factory closed, and I don't know what I'm going to do to feed my family, and this town is like falling apart. And so, you telling me, hey, the Constitution, bro, right? It doesn't really do much to help me and help my family. Or, if you're younger, it doesn't really help my prospects. And you talked about millennials as well. And I think that, as someone, I was born in '84, so we're sort of like the elder millennial, centennial kind of thing. And, you look at, if you came of age during, the financial crisis, like you were in debt, you were not getting a job, basically, a lot of people then went back to school, they continued to get more into debt, and a lot of this stuff was driven by insane speculation on Wall Street, which was, of course, provided for them by the government. Nobody went to jail for any of this stuff. And the way that people decided to fix the system was to take away, like strip ownership away from, millennials, Zoomers, and the rest of it, and to say, well, maybe home ownership isn't something. No, home ownership, of course, was what was the traditional. We talked about the American archetype being the cowboy, but what is the American dream? Right? The American dream used to be owning your own home. This was like the synonymous thing everyone was told, and that the path was laid out. Go to school, get your bachelor's degree, get a job, get a wife, have some kids, boom, there's your house, you're good to go, right? That's totally been broken, and it's been broken for a long time. And a lot of Republicans are running around thinking it's still the 1980s and using these boring, I agree with you, like boring arguments and not talking about what's actually happening, because you see the same financial institutions and the same government institutions coming in and saying the problem with all of this was those stupid people thinking that they could own their own homes. We need to take that away from them. We need to take ownership away from them, take away the ability for them to build that generational wealth that they could actually then use, to seek. You're talking about opportunities, but you're exactly right that there's so many challenges that have been put in place by this system, this corrupt system, that's preventing people from actually achieving any of these ends that we'd really like for there to be. But it isn't just their beliefs, and it isn't just not understanding the Constitution. It's actual huge structural problems in our country.
Look, I would agree that there are problems in the country, but the reason I'm emphasizing that America is about the adventure, and I didn't say Constitution, bro. I'm just saying, like, I specifically didn't do that.
But I do mean you.
Like,
you fool.
I feel sympathetic for a lot of small town America,
Wait,
and
what?
there are some instances where small town America has like fallen apart not due to circumstances not their own. I mean, the fact that we allowed pain pills to flood this nation and then cut them off, and that led to disaster.
Thanks, Frank Luntz.
Yeah, everybody understands that. But like, we have to also understand that the reason the Rust Belt existed, all those areas had manufacturing, is not because it was ordained by God that manufacturing would be there. It's because they had access to waterways, and it was expensive as hell to transport anything in this country or anywhere by ground transportation. If you were to ship a product from Pittsburgh to New York, which is only 300 miles over ground, you would send it on rivers down to the Mississippi, out of the port of New Orleans, up the East Coast, into New York's port. So what happened in the 70s was not like a giant conspiracy. It was that somebody invented two things. One, we ground transportation got less expensive. There was containerization, so you could ship stuff over large portions of the country. And two, we invented air conditioning, which is awesome. The reason we're all here in Texas is because of air conditioning. You know what else was allowed to come to Texas because of air conditioning? Manufacturing. This is why, like, the death of Michigan coincides not with the rise of these foreign auto companies, although that did play a part. Competition is a real thing, but it coincides with the rise of Auto Alley in South Carolina. So we can talk about like restoring Michigan and restoring all of these like different places, but in reality, the major problems that they have are problems of them passing laws based on their natural advantages that no longer exist anymore, and people should move when the jobs move. Like, there is too much complacency in this country. Like, it's just a fact.
I think there's also an issue, too, when we talk about some of the older values that were sold. I think to some extent we have to acknowledge that as we continue to grow as a country, it's not going to be possible to do these things. You know, if you want to buy a house and have a family and be able to afford all of that off of a single job today, people will tell you it's impossible, but it's totally possible. You just have to move to Montana or Wyoming to do it. You're not going to be able to go to LA. You're not going to be able to go to New York. You're not going to be able to go to Miami. You're not going to be able to go to San Francisco and have the single family home off the one job and the mom at home staying with the kids, because it's just not affordable. It's not possible. We have so many people that live in this country today and so many people that want to move into cities. If you're trying to sell them simultaneously this idea that they can have the single family home and the white picket fence while also living in the most economically prosperous areas in the United States, it's a physics problem. You just can't do it.
No. Move to Houston if you want to do that. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the United States of America, and incomes grow faster than the cost of living up until they had a bunch of transplants from New Orleans, but even that is correcting. The reason why is because Houston has no zoning regulations. So if you want to live next to a parking lot in your cul-de-sac, like, that's totally dope. You can see those images online. But also Dallas-Fort Worth area is very inexpensive because they have virtually no zoning regulations. Like, the reason you can't afford to live in San Francisco or New York, and I live in New York and I can't afford to live there, is because of zoning regulations, it's because of open space laws, all of these restrictions that people who live there are imposing on people who could move there because they want to have a nice little bit of scenery that they can look at. Well, I'm a capitalist. If you want scenery, buy that property that has the scenery and you pay for it. Don't vote to keep future generations out. Like, that is a complete violation of our rights to due process and equal protection under the law, that just because you showed up first, you can vote to ban these other people. But yeah, if you want to move to a big, growing city, Houston is the one. I mean Dallas. Dallas, Fort Worth.
Go Cowboys.
Found the Dallas, yeah.
You'll have to get your passport from me.
Yeah, that got more of a boo than the Eagles thing.
So I've got a final question, then we're going to go to a Q&A. And this
Nah,
brings up something
already?
you mentioned,
What the
Sean.
fuck?
Comedian Sarah Silverman recently has talked about the possibility of a national divorce. It's a phrase that I'm hearing more in popular culture in the past 6 months. And we're sitting here in the great state of Texas, which has a growing favorability rate for the Texit movement. My question is, do you think we're at a place where the political and cultural divide is so great that it would be better to have an amicable parting of ways? And make your case to me either way, because my mind is not yet made up.
Listen, there's no such thing as an amicable parting of ways. That's live action role playing. Stop doing it. And if you think there is, please draw me the map of how we divide up the Mississippi River, because international trade still requires water-based transportation. So show me your map of the United States where the coasts are given to the left and the interior has to use the network of rivers to go to the Mississippi to get out of the port of New Orleans, that's going to make sense and not lead to a civil war. It's nonsense, it's subversive, and I'm not in for it.
Yeah, I have two really quick takes on the national divorce thing. Number one is that we're probably not going to get a national divorce. We'll have more like a national separation. Like, we're still living under the same roof for the sake of the normies, but we're sleeping in separate bedrooms, we're dating other people. It's just but we got to stay together for the sake of the normies, so we don't go down that road. But then number two is that I find it very interesting, just from sociological perspective, that every single person I see who's totally for a national divorce, I'm definitely not one of them, but they're all Gen Xers. And it's like, divorce is the answer for everything for Gen X, right? Just get divorced, man. Just walk,
really?
bro. Just get out of there. And it's like, it's such a Gen X thing. And so what's interesting is that, as that sort of cusp, centennial generation, it's sort of like, we have the, we're not quite as, what is it? We still have like youthful hope in the sort of elder millennial area, but we also we don't get the cynicism and the jadedness of Gen X.
I think if I were to imagine that you said amicable. If I were to imagine that it could be amicable, which I agree with Sean, I don't think that it could be when you're like really looking at the details and the logistics of it. There are days where I wake up and I say, I'm really tired of being hated. I'm really tired of being told I'm a bioterrorist threat. I'm really tired of my children being told that they're a bioterrorist threat. I'd really love to live with my own people, and I would love that. But I think when you look at the logistics of it, I'm just not sure that it's possible. I will say when you mentioned Texit, I did see my friend Chad Prather. I know he's coming up later. I would just like to say he is running for governor. And if you want to know about Texit, you should ask him more about that. But I don't know how possible it is, but I will admit in my weaker moments, there are days where I'm like, I'm just kind of done being hated. I would much prefer rejoining with the people who believe in the foundational principles of this country.
I think it's LARPing cringe. I think most people up here seem it's LARPing, live action role play. You like pretend it's not gonna happen. Logistically, it doesn't make any sense. I haven't seen people talking about it seriously, but I'd be curious what those maps look like too, because I feel like people miss that one of the big divides in this country, it's really not so much red states and blue states, although those exist, but it's like blue cities and red rural areas. And I think that when that's your largest divide, I don't even know how you'd go about cutting up the map to figure out like who would be in which area and how you, it seems completely impossible.
We also have quite a division between like people who can defend themselves and people who can't. So people who can defend themselves, and we've seen this historically throughout cultures, will tend to think freely because they don't they're not seeking consensus. So if they're saying something, it's, am I saying this because it is true, versus if you're someone who can't defend yourself, you're thinking, can I say this because it will be accepted by the collective?
Oh my God.
And if you want to wrestle more local control, I know you have to go to questions, then put that energy into repealing the 17th Amendment. Most of the problems in our country that we're all concerned about like power drifting to the federal government, are due to the fact that we directly elect our senators and they're federal entities. There's a reason all these court nominees were confirmed by the state's representative senates, because the state legislatures used to send the senators. It's because the courts are meant to adjudicate disputes between the states and the federal government. So you have the president, an agent of the federal government, appoint and confirmed by the senators who are agents of the states. We don't have that, and we wonder why power keeps trickling up to the federal government. We removed a major check and balance in our federal government, and we pretend like, I wonder why things are going that way.
I mean, that's really what I mean by national separation. Empower the states. National separation, it also used to be called federalism, which is something we had in this country.
We're going to go to Q&A, but I'm going to ask one quick question. You have 10 seconds, Stephen. What is the what is the unifying narrative for this country if we are going to stay together?
I have no idea. I don't think there is a unified narrative for the United States.
Let's start with questions.
Well, on behalf of all the Gen Xers, I am not jaded. Very excited to be here. I have a Built Bar wrapper. I wanted to give it to you, Sarah, but I ate it. Sorry about that. Just to get back to the most contentious thing, because I really see it in Dallas, and I'm from California, dividing us is how can you, Sarah, and Steve, is it Steve? Be together, live together, commune together when you do not want to get the vax and will not get the vax, and your children won't, and they won't wear the masks, and you seriously believe that it's a major health issue and that you're a bioterrorist. How do you get that to work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Stephen would have a different answer than I would, but I would argue that that's just how we've been living in society this whole time, and it should work no differently than we've been living in society this entire time. We all make different choices for our own bodies. We all can make those choices. We all have the ability to make those choices, and I'm not going to judge someone for getting the vaccine. I don't think anyone should judge me for not getting the vaccine because, again, we live in a society where risk of transmitting disease is literally always going to be 100%. We are always going to transmit diseases. I'm willing to understand that and accept the risks. If someone else isn't willing to understand that and accept the risks, there's only so much I can do. So I'm
getting a vaccination would be like the bare minimum.
Do or don't or whatever. In fact, I don't care to know their medical status, and I think that that's the problem. Is that you have one side of the aisle who says I actually don't really care about your medical privacy. I believe that should stay private, and then there is one side of the aisle who, again, thinks that I am a bioterrorist threat. So I hope he has a great answer for how we can come together, because I would love to hear it.
So I am absolutely judgmental, very much so, people that I disagree with. However, in the United States, you have two options, basically. So we live in a democracy. I've said this over and over again. I'll continue to say it. I can push for the things that I believe in, and I can hope that those policies are popular enough to get elected. If the ones that I agree with don't get enacted, I have two options. I either abide by it, and you do it, and there are policies that I disagree with, and you abide by it, and that's how it goes. Or you take your child out, or you remove yourself from whatever situation it is that you don't agree with. If I think that the way that speed limits are done in a way that I don't agree with, then stop driving. Or if you think that the way, if I felt very strongly about vaccine mandates for children and they weren't mandated, then you take your child out of school and you do homeschooling, right?
Well, would you agree, though, that if we had, like what Sean and I are saying, that if we had more empowered states, and that it wasn't a federal thing, that, you know, if there were a state law that said that, and, you know, go with the moving, that, you know, hey, I want to live in a state where my policies are more accepted versus coming to a place like Texas or, you know, wherever, like Texas versus California kind of question. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, states have a right. I mean, it has to be decided on a legal battle. I don't know where the rights of the states end and the federal governments begin when it comes to matters of public health or whatnot. But I mean, that's something that the courts fight about. But yeah, I mean, some states have different laws for different things, and obviously you respect the different laws of the different states depending on where you live. Yeah.
I believe the precedent that's often cited for why the vaccine mandates are constitutional is a state vaccine mandate.
Yeah.
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
The central principle is consent of the governed. That's the most important phrase. Consent of the governed, that's the most important phrase in the Declaration of Independence. That's the basis of the Constitution. It requires accountability, which nobody out here, whether you're left or right, is actually seeing in our government. And with accountability, you get credibility, which also is what's lacking with regard to our government. And nobody out here actually thinks that the government gives a damn what we think. The mandate was not part of the last presidential election. Nobody ran on it. Nobody voted for it. So my question is, can y'all agree that consent of the governed and the rules that we play by is actually the way to get back to where we need to be?
Yeah, I mean, I would say you absolutely do consent. Every single decree of the United States government is not voted on by direct democracy. We vote for people that represent us, and then we hope that they enact whatever agenda that we agree with. If we don't, then you go and you vote them out next legislative session. But the idea that just because the president is enacting something or something comes from Congress that we don't directly vote on, it's not the will of the people, I think that betrays a misunderstanding of how our federal government is supposed to work.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that to a certain extent. The idea that if something is not in a campaign or in a platform, therefore you didn't consent to it. It's like, no, we do have a representative republic. So you send representatives for a period of time. They don't have to tell you literally everything they do. They should, but you have the opportunity to punish them at the ballot box. However, we have a system where supposedly, allegedly, theoretically, the legislature makes laws, and the president shouldn't be able to look at an OSHA regulation that has to do with people wearing hard hats and say that that applies to a national vaccine mandate. So
you stupid people.
So we don't
think you have,
the Germans
rights
come again.
again. You have none. You have nothing. We will mandate everything for you from now on. This is how it goes.
By the way, just to add to Sean's point, these are, and it's not just the OSHA regulation, right? It's also the CDC being used as another arm to enforce the eviction moratorium. I mean, we're seeing these departments being abused, and admittedly, the Biden administration already said, yeah, this really isn't legal. We really shouldn't be doing this, but we're going to do it anyway. So, I mean, I would agree with you, Sean. I think, like, if we were to get back to the actual system that we were supposed to have with checks and balances and the legislature working as it's supposed to, then I think that would be way better than the system we have now, which is clearly an abuse of power.
I mean, we say abuse, but it's a conservative court right now. If you think that it's being abused, you challenge it legislatively. If the Supreme Court upholds it, then maybe these federal institutions had more power than we knew originally. Or maybe we should vote in Congress to remove some of the powers that are delegated to them. There's a great deal of deference given to executive agencies when it comes to how they want to implement or enact their particular laws. Maybe that could be scaled back on, but I don't like the idea of saying that, like, it's illegally used or it's not really legal. It's like, I mean, if you don't like it, you have a Supreme Court that is conservative, you can challenge it.
Right. Unfortunately, a Supreme Court case doesn't go there overnight, right? Like
Yeah,
it takes time,
but
right?
that's the
It takes time.
process.
I mean, I don't disagree with you, but there's not always an immediate fix.
A lot of the lefties, when they were against the wars, would talk about how the war wasn't declared and the president shouldn't just be able to do this, that, and the
I
other.
have honestly
I
no
agree with that
idea.
Principle, like you can't
I have
transfer
honestly no idea.
your duties to another branch of the government. That's not how checks and balances work. And the Supreme Court did shut down the eviction moratorium twice. Once they were like, you know what, we'll give Biden a little break. So it was a soft shutdown, and then he took advantage of that to expand it again. And he knew he had no authority, he admitted it, he did it anyway.
All right. This question is for Destiny, Steven, whichever you prefer.
Banana the second.
Do you believe that people on the right, including some of the people on this panel, actually believe that the left is goading them into extremism? Or do you think that they're intentionally lying?
No, I have no idea.
Like
If he's alluding to the fact that the Nazi Germans did a similar thing, he is utterly moronic.
One of the hugest problems, what? Yeah, true, you are, am I right? I think it is absolutely fucking horrible how...
To equivocate the two is immensely stupid.
Everybody is on different sides of the political aisle. I will, unless I have a really good reason to believe so, I will never think that somebody is acting in some malicious or horrible manner. Like, I think that you probably genuinely do believe that you're doing what's best for your family and your children. I would hope so.
I know I am.
And I would assume the same of any conservative. I think that people on the left and people on the right all too often get into these mindsets where they're very quick to demonize or frame how other people are acting in the very worst of ways. But, I mean, like, that's just the nature, unfortunately, of the
You see that,
political
Sean?
landscape.
You see this, Sean? You cannot simply run around calling everyone a pedophile.
Yeah, my question is actually for actual Justice Warrior. Earlier you were making a point about the left not understanding the right, and you cited a study from Dr. Jonathan Haidt about that. I was curious why you didn't mention the fact that that study actually said that everybody over-exaggerates the differences between everybody. It's just that mostly left people have larger discrepancies between those things. So if you were aware of that difference, the actual conclusion of the study, why didn't you say it? And if you don't know that, then why are you citing studies that you haven't read?
Okay. All right. So what he's talking about is there's
You think that's the same? So when the government in Texas says that you can't have an abortion because it's not your body, apparently when vaccination is taken in order, that is also, it's my body. So are you okay with the abortion mandates? Because those people are the same people. Those people who are anti-vax and are anti-abortion are the same people.
Jonathan Haidt's research. They have
Oh,
people
that's
fill
nice.
out
That's progress
surveys
of a
about their
kind.
values as themselves and as other people, right? So obviously, this should go without saying.
Oh.
People
yeah.
aren't 100% and filling out the values when they fill them out as other people. But the overall conclusion, and this is in his book and it's in his research, is that the further left you are, the worse you are at identifying moderate or right-wing positions. So yeah, obviously they're not going to be 100% perfect, and being right-wing or being a centrist does not appear to give you a disadvantage in taking the place of somebody else. So that's why I didn't mention the thing that wasn't that relevant or interesting or compelling.
So this question is directed to both Sean and Steven. This has to do with general trends that we're having. In 2020, Biden won about 53% of the vote, but he won 70% of the GDP. And more economic prosperity is concentrated in cities. And we're seeing such a huge rural and urban divide. Is the issue with the struggle with national discourse and national unity going to increase? And how are ways
Calm
that
the fuck
we can fix
on.
that going forward?
Thank you.
There's There's an echo for us on the stage in hearing the question.
Yeah, when you guys speak into your mics, you have to speak directly in, because
Yeah.
it's really hard to hear it if it's not directly in.
Maybe step a little closer, actually. I think we could even hear you better.
All right, so the question has to do with more and more cities being concentrated centers for wealth,
Filter to
and
the
those cities
mic.
also being places for political polarization versus the rural area. Given the trends in our economy, this problem seems to be getting worse and worse. So how would we restructure maybe zoning laws, as AJW pointed out, or the way that we structure our country to kind of bring people together and increase political unity?
So I think it's basically, we're talking about how you're getting a greater concentration of people in cities, and how do you account for that, like in the way that your legislative body is made up? Is that, was that his question? That was kind of his question?
I thought he said concentrations of wealth are leading to polarization.
Oh my God.
Wealth and people, okay.
So I get a lot of heat over this. I really like our bicameral legislature. I like the idea that you have two
Okay.
senators from every state, that the state of Nebraska in the Senate has as much power as the state of California. I also like the idea that you have a House that makes it so that, like, 4 or 5 small states can't totally write new legislation for larger states as well. In terms of, like, how do you balance it when you go inside of a state and balance power between, like, cities and rural areas, I don't think that we should balance power based on, it sounded like you were implying that we should do it based on, like, wealth or GDP. I think that there's a lot of people that can offer a lot to the United States that don't just come down to the economic productive power because they happen to work in tech or finance or something else. So yeah, I don't know if I would restructure things based on those questions. We can always have arguments over how you draw districts or how that goes, but I think that largely speaking, I think that the American system with the way our government is set up right now actually works pretty well. But I think the problem is right now what it's expressing is how polarized the country is, which means the government is pretty ineffective at getting anything done, unfortunately.
And like you mentioned the zoning law specifically, one of the things that like restrictive zoning laws does is it makes it like basically not profitable to build any middle class housing. Like you can have a rich person in a luxury apartment and you're like, oh, you make way more money catering to them. But in reality, if you built a ton of apartments for like low to middle income people, you would probably make more money and you wouldn't be subject to the whims of that small group of people deciding that they want to leave for greener pastures. So the reason I don't need to get rid of every zoning regulation. I understand people want some control over their neighborhood and they don't want to look like some of the most ridiculous images of Houston, which by the way, look those up, they're hilarious. But like we can't let like people in California is one of the worst at this, like vote against people who want to move into their areas to ban every single project from ever being able to be built. Like it's a violation, in my opinion, of their rights because you're giving the current residents rights over people who are in the country and should have equal protection, and it just makes it impossible to afford to live in these places.
I think one of the other issues is the reason that you see a lot of concentration of wealth in the cities is something called the Cantillon effect, and it's just it's very long, but you could summarize it by saying those closest to the money printer are the ones who benefit the most of it, as opposed to those furthest away who are impacted by higher inflation and the bullwhip effect of rising costs across the world. And so you see that as well in the cities, where so much of this wealth is essentially fake, because we have this system where you're putting massive amounts of money in at the top, it's benefiting those at the top, and then it trickles down, not very well, Reaganomics, whatever. Again, it's not the 1980s anymore, and I think you're seeing
that is true.
More
it is
so
not.
You shut down that system, and that'll actually help to ease some of these issues.
Alrighty, so Jack, you've kind of touched on this a couple times already, but I'd like to hear an expansion.
Can you put the mic up,
yeah,
almost uncomfortably up, eat it?
All right, is this better?
It is actually.
All right, so Jack has touched on this a couple times already, but I'd like to hear an expansion. Instead of a national divorce, can we just return to states' rights and rule and severely restrict federal power to minimal needs, and how can we effectively do that?
I would be totally in favor of that. I am all for that. How we do it is, I hope someone else can answer that one.
Repeal the 17th Amendment.
How do we do that?
Have a constitutional convention.
Right, but I'm just saying that the
Amendment.
likelihood of all of that happening is so slim. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be optimistic. We will totally get it done.
I think that there's a great amount of productive power that comes from working as one cohesive body rather than separate 50 separate states. I think there's always places where we can carve out more state rights for certain issues, but I mean, to some extent, it's probably good to have some like parity or equalization of like rights across different state borders. Sometimes it's a little weird that, like, for instance, I can get arrested, you know, like smoking marijuana in one state but not another, or I can smoke somewhere, or I can have a public drink somewhere and not other places. Like, I don't know. I think that hitting parity across some states for a certain law, or for some of you might know, like, there are some states where you can ride without a helmet, and then as soon as you cross into another one, like, state troopers will pull you over if you don't have a helmet on because of different rules. I think it's okay to have a high degree of mirroring of the laws between the states. Maybe we just carve out more individual state rights for things that we feel are important in the future.
Regarding democracy, is it okay if 90% of the population votes to, you know, slaughter the other 10%? I mean, that's democracy, isn't it? I mean, how do you answer, you know, when the German democracy invaded Poland and massacred 6 million Jews? I mean, you know, democracy has no credibility anymore. I mean, democracy is, you know, Australia. Democracy is, you know, rounding up the Japanese in World War II. You know, I mean, how do you answer all the disasters of democracy?
I do think, I mean, maybe that was directed at Stephen, but I do think but democracy is a terrible argument for like that reason. Obviously, we want limits. Even he would say he wants limits that respect the rights
Like
of individuals.
Rights, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like,
you have a right to live.
Ideally, I mean, truly, if we're being honest with ourselves, nobody here would disagree that if 90% of the country wanted to do something, it would happen. Right? That's just if you have 90% of the people that want to do something, it's going to happen. 90% of the people want to do it. Ideally, the way that a democracy hopefully functions is you have some special protections carved out where people can't vote away the civil rights of other people. But I mean, a democracy is only as good as the people that vote in any given democracy. So there is no, I can't give you like a guarantee that like, well, this will never happen, because I would be lying to say so.
So Destiny has confirmed that he's against 90% of South Africans voting to attack white farmers.
I guess so. I don't speak for South Africa's government. I speak for, sure.
All right, this question's for everyone, and it kind of has to do with a lot of issues, you know, underlying seem to be with data, personal data, health data, DNA data, speech data, whether it's online, in public data. So do we need a new Bill of Rights for our digital data, for our digital footprint that we put out there in public and on the internet?
Absolutely not. This is hilarious. Your data is our data. You've given it yourself freely. You've given it to Zuckerberg, to Bezos, to everyone. Your data is now ours. There's no rule for this. You will not be given any control of your own data, your own power, your own life. You'll own nothing. You'll be happy. You'll be in Zuckerverse. You'll be given your injections on a bi-daily basis. Your data will be controlled, and your life will be planned out. It'll be very nice for you.
We had surprise panelists on this one. I mean,
it's definitely true.
I don't know that would take a brand new Bill of Rights, but I do agree with you that there is a lot of data that is going around that, you know, a lot of people are making money off of, and it needs to be addressed. How that is addressed, I think, is, you know, I don't know that we could get that done, but certainly something needs to be done.
I mean, I could see one written that I would support. I think the GDPR took good steps towards ensuring that you could keep track of what data a company has about you and have a right to have your data deleted after some period of time. So there's probably some legislation that we could come to an agreement on for like an Internet Bill of Rights. I don't know if I want like the median age 75-year-old congressperson figuring out like what Facebook memes should be banned or not. I don't know how I'd feel about that, but yeah, it probably would be a good idea to move in that direction.
If they can't log on to the computer by themselves, we don't want them making the rules, right?
So my question is to Jack, but anyone can answer. At the very, very beginning, it might have been in your opening statement, you either alluded to or directly said that the Boogaloo Boys were created by the feds in order to create some sort of narrative to keep them in power. Do you not think that the fact that people on both sides of the aisles, whether it's conservatives with the Boogaloo Boys not accepting that they're a real organization, or lefties with groups like the Black Hammer, not accepting that they're real and that they're all just psyops might be leading to a lack of cohesiveness in the U.S., not being able to call those things out for what they are.
He's coming here.
I mean, did you have like a specific question or? I mean, I agree.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Then at the beginning, you referenced that, or you alluded to the fact that the Boogaloo Boys were feds. So my question is, do you not think that that is damaging to discourse and to cohesiveness?
The Boogaloo Boys are definitely feds. Like, that's very obvious.
Wait, like all of them?
Very, no, not all of them. That's the way a federal operation works, right? You push this, there's a meme that gets pushed around, and then people get caught up in this thing, and then federal agents decide to go and pinpoint certain people. They did the exact same thing, by the way, to a lot of Muslim teenagers during the War on Terror who would be posting stuff, and, you know, there wasn't like the Facebook groups like it was in like it is now, but they would catch some kid posting something online, and then they would reach out to him and say, hey man, I'm from Hezbollah, or I'm from the PLO, and I want you to come work with me, and we're gonna do this mission to save, you know, or to fight back against the US government, and it would go all along down the line until that person had committed what's called, you know, conspiracy to commit, you know, whatever it was, most likely terrorism if it was one of those cases, and then they would snatch him up, right? So it's an entrapment operation, and it's very clear that it's very, very, very large amount of Boogaloos, the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers. I'm not saying that it was in it that the forces behind what made people want to join, you know, a gun rights group, you know, is some kind of federal operation. Obviously not, right? And that makes people become anti-government. Obviously not. But I'm saying these groups are targeted, used, infiltrated, and then eventually people go to jail because of things that federal agents do to them.
Just to be clear on what entrapment is, because we use this term a lot, if somebody presents to you the opportunity to do a crime and you jump on it, that's not entrapment. Entrapment is if you were forced to do a crime that you wouldn't have otherwise committed. So for instance, if I come up to you and I say, hey, you want to sell some crack, you can make a lot of money, and you do it, that's a legitimate catch. Like, if somebody else would have offered you, you would have jumped on it. Now, if I come up to you and I say, like, hey, I'm holding your wife hostage, I'm going to kill you if you don't sell crack, now we've got entrapment. Absolutely, absolutely. Offering somebody, presenting somebody the opportunity to commit a crime and then them committing it does not rise to the level of entrapment. Absolutely not.
No, you're right about that, but your example of what is entrapment is way overboard.
Well, if you threaten somebody, if you make somebody, I'm not saying it has to go that far.
You have to present circumstances that would make like it's a weird way the law is written, but to make present them circumstances that would make somebody who would not normally commit this crime commit the crime. Like, you're literally entrapping them. But you don't kidnapping their family and taking them hostage. That has nothing to do with
I'm giving the most extreme example.
No,
I'm just
that's
saying that,
literally like a different crime, though.
Sure, okay, but I'm saying that if
it's
you
like
present,
not an example
if you present
of
somebody
it.
the opportunity to commit a crime and they do the crime,
Steven.
that's not entrapment. That doesn't count as entrapment.
Like, if somebody held a gun to your wife's head and made you do something, don't go to court and be like, I was entrapped, bro.
Okay, we only have 5 minutes left, and we have far more than 5 people. So,
Steven.
quick question directed at one person, one answer.
Yes, my question's for Stephen over here. So you said earlier that part of the justification for vaccinating children is to protect others. You gave the example of Timmy spreading it to Jimmy, giving it to Grandma, right? Now, are you familiar with the study that came out of Barnstable County, Massachusetts about 2 or 3 months ago, where they found that the viral load in vaccinated people was very similar to the viral load in unvaccinated people that had, well, I guess the vaccinated people have had breakthrough cases. With that being said, if you're less likely to show symptoms if you're vaccinated, wouldn't the person who would be the most risk to spread disease amongst children and spread to a grandmother be somebody who's actually vaccinated?
So I know there's been a study. I know there's at least one that came out that said that I think at the peak time of symptoms, viral load for vaccinated people, I think was similar to unvaccinated people. I don't remember if that was a preprint or if this is like published, peer-reviewed and everything. But even if that was the case, to figure out who's more likely to transmit, at the end of the day, we still have to gather the data on that and publish the research. Just because there might be a mechanism by which we can guess there might be more transmission, for instance, being asymptomatic, doesn't necessarily mean we can say there was more transmission, because there might be other confounding factors that make it so that's not the case. So, for instance, if a vaccinated person has a high viral load,
The NFT
less
stock,
likely to
exactly.
get infected in the first place, that might be a confound
That
that
was-
reduce the likelihood of transmission, even if they might do it asymptomatically without
Yikes.
being aware of it.
So doesn't that sound like a bunch of stuff we should probably figure out before we push national mandates?
I guess, Steve, what I would say is, you know...
I mean, this is what the CDC studies. You can go and read the study.
Well, yeah. Of course. No, this is the... no. I mean, He can try and justify it, but there's really no justification. I mean, the only thing he has left to say is, I don't give a fuck off. But I mean, alright, fair enough. But it's definitely hypocritical.
Hey, you can read the study if you want to look it up.
This is off the CDC's website.
Like high levels of hypocrisy.
Highest cases in the highest vaccinated places.
You work for
Israel.
Pfizer now.
Right. Yep.
I mean,
Next question.
I just want to know.
Based and Pfizer pilled.
I just want to
Yeah,
know
at least he
how
hides
many of
it.
you up here actually believe that the FDA did approve the
Dude, I
COVID
was
vaccine,
never like
and
not a
if they
fan.
indeed did not.
I think Hassan is
approve
funny
the
as fuck
COVID
sometimes.
vaccine. I'm not talking about the press release
Oh.
that was released. I'm saying, did any of you bother to actually go to FDA and see if it was actually approved? And if not, what can you tell everybody about the Nuremberg Code and how forcing experimental treatments is a violation of the Nuremberg Code
Don't speak
and a
with
crime,
your nose.
a war crime against humanity?
Is this? Did we walk to the FDA building? Was that the question, or I didn't? So.
Did you go online and actually look at FDA and see the FDA?
Oh, we got a heckler.
And what was actually approved?
Are you referring to the fact that it was approved for a later date?
Or I think the only vaccine that's approved right now, I think it's called the. Yeah. So I believe it was the Pfizer. The only one that's gotten past the EUA, I believe, is the Pfizer. I think it's called Community or something. Like the actual name of the Pfizer one is the one that's.
It's only done overseas, not in.
No, I don't believe it is.
What's only done overseas?
The one that's being.
But the FDA doesn't approve drugs for overseas. For Europe, it'd be the EMA that approves the drug. The FDA has approved Pfizer's version of the vaccine.
We have
thus
to move
far,
on to a next question.
Next question, yeah.
The FDA sucks.
No, I love him. Oh!
I was kind of hoping that I was going to have a little bit more time, but this will go out to any righty that wants to
Oh
take
my
it on stage,
God.
all right? So,
I can't hear anything.
Oh, say again?
Speak up. Speak
Okay.
up.
God.
Yeah, let's try it without. Can you say it without the mic?
Okay. So you said, and this goes to the conservatives, so you said that you're simply hated by your political opponents on the left, and you compared yourselves to a bear who was simply being poked, and that these
No, I'm
feelings
not.
that the left has for you is
Piece
not
of shit.
deserved. Forgetting political parties, that self-described conservatives have been seen throughout time to be supporting things like obscenity laws, anti-gay laws that bans them from being able to have legal marriage, Jim Crow laws, white backlash towards anti-segregation, and blasphemy laws and more. Do you really feel like none of these feelings that the left has for the right are deserved at all?
Yeah, but see, you're doing the exact same thing that you just said you were against, right? You're taking things from throughout history that none of us up here that I recall have said that we espouse and just applying it with a broad brush to a group of people that you don't like. You're doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I'm Northern scum, so I don't know what you're talking about, Jim Crow laws, and I didn't do none of that. Also, Jim Crow laws and a lot of segregation wasn't a response to anti-segregation legislation. Segregation kind of comes before the anti-segregation movement. A lot of segregationist laws actually came due in the northern parts of the country, in the Midwest, due to the great migration of blacks from the South, because a lot of the blacks that were already in the North and in the West were already integrated. We have this like comical view of America and race relations, that it's like this linear path of improvement, but that is not the case. It's actually like fits and starts in this country. And that's like not only true for black people, but it's true for like Jewish acceptance in the country, for Asians, etc.
Wait, what happened?
I don't know why conservatives are so short-sighted when it comes to
What?
public health. You don't get shot just for the children. You get shot to protect their families, to protect their teachers, to protect other people in society.
What happened?
This is how vaccinations work. Vaccinations.
And just applying it with a broad brush to a group of people that you don't like. You're doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I'm Northern scum, so I don't know what you're talking about, Jim Crow laws, and I didn't do none of that. Also, Jim Crow laws and a lot of segregation wasn't a response to anti-segregation legislation. Segregation kind of comes before the anti-segregation movement. A lot of segregationist laws actually came in the northern parts of the country, in the Midwest, due to the great migration of blacks from the South, because a lot of the blacks that were already in the North and in the West were already integrated. We have this like comical view of America and race relations, that it's like this linear path of improvement, but that is not the case. It's actually like fits and starts in this country. And that's like not only true for black people, but it's true for like Jewish acceptance in the country, for Asians, etc.
What the fuck?
You don't want it so that anytime somebody posts something on your web.
And we'll get the next panel started. So 2:50, but nice and brief so everybody gets a chance.
Really no way to be bigger than YouTube. If you would be, Google could then just...
Our speakers, he's been featured in the New York Times and his famous Twitch streamer, Stephen Bonnell.
The second bastard.
The queen of controversial conversations, Ariel Scorsella. Yeah, that's fine. Or whichever, that's fine. And worldwide renowned political shit talker, Nico House. And author and video essayist, Peter Coffin.
Peter Coffin? Oh no. Oh no.
All right. Welcome to Better Discourse. I'm your moderator, Brian Edward. And today our panel is Democracy Dies with Dorsey. That's meant to be a little bit funny because some of that censorship is coming from social media. But I did hear the quote, "When you tear out a man's tongue, you're not proving him a liar. You're only telling the world that you fear what he might say." And that was said by some guy named Tyrion from some show named Game of Thrones. And while we're not in Westeros, we're in the real world. Censorship.
I'm pretty sure that was
these
said
kind
by
of things
someone
are
else
pretty much
first,
an
though.
issue. And I wanted to start the conversation off by citing the ACLU, which may or may not be a defender of civil liberties right now. That could be debated. But it says that there's two fundamental principles that come into play involving free expression. The first is the government cannot limit expression just because any listener or even the majority of a community is offended by its content. But that's balanced by a second principle, that expression may be restricted only if it clearly causes direct and imminent harm to an important social interest. So I wanted to ask some of the panelists, do you agree with the sentiments of the ACLU here, or do you feel like this second principle is being abused? And if so, how and by whom? And let's start with Ariel.
It's a loaded question, right? Because I think all of us, correct me if I'm wrong, all of us have been censored at one point. Maybe not you, because you're a little bit more leaning far left at the moment.
I have absolutely been censored.
Have
Plenty,
you?
Don't worry.
Okay.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
then it's a problem across the political spectrum, right? I think that, as far as I'm concerned, I've had people come for me, you know, in multiple ways, try to censor me, and even if I disagree with them to the core, I don't think anybody should be censored, and I especially don't think any major network should be censoring anybody. I think, if anything, if I have a good enough argument, my argument will win in the long run anyway.
Well, I mean, is it really an ideal, or is it a question of institutional power? That's where I'm always coming from on this.
Oh.
What are you saying? Where is it coming from? Should you be allowed to criticize power? And yes, obviously. Are you going to be? That's another heavy question. I do think
Big Asian
that's probably
girlfriend,
the
Peter
kind of stuff
Coffin.
that I would like to be trying to address here.
Nico, where are you at?
So, a friend of mine, Garland Nixon, used to sit on the board of the ACLU, and he left because he understands that, I mean, that principle is just, it's wrong, it's unethical. We can't have such a principle when we don't understand all of the agendas that every single powerful institution has.
And so where they may convince the public that some speech is or could be dangerous to them, where they're merely just trying to push an ulterior motive that we may not yet be aware of. And I think we see that time and time and time and time again. And so who's to say what's dangerous? Something could appear dangerous in the short term, but ultimately end up working out in the long term. But at the end of the day, like, I feel like everybody who knows me knows I'm a free speech absolutist. And the only way to defeat bad speech is just with more speech, and just make sure you know what the hell you're talking about when you address it. Like, that's the way to conquer this fear of, what if they say something bad? Bad things could happen. Well, allow speech to flow freely, and I guarantee you problems will begin to solve themselves.
Really? Can I just piggyback on that point? Because this is one thing an ex-girlfriend said. The only thing I got from that relationship was this point. And she said that no matter what somebody says, we should allow them to say it, because people are thinking it anyway. And when you allow them to say it publicly, you also allow people to be aware that they're saying possibly something that's incorrect, and then you can correct them on it. But you wouldn't be able to correct them if they didn't have the opportunity to say it in the first place.
Destiny, what do you think?
I think that the First Amendment is important. I think it's beautiful. I think it's well worded. And I think freedom of speech as a concept is something that should be defended. But I think oftentimes people misapply it to private platforms like Twitter and Facebook, and they try to take these arguments about whether or not the government should abridge our freedom of speech, which it shouldn't, except in certain dire cases, like yelling fire in a crowded theater, or the spreading of like child pornography or something, of course, which I think we all agree with. But I think that applying those same arguments to private institutions actually, in a way, becomes an anti-First Amendment argument. So I do agree that the First Amendment is important insofar as it applies to the government, but those principles shouldn't carry forward to every single private platform that we engage in, because one of your freedoms as an owner of a private platform is to determine what type of content do I want posted on this particular platform.
But what if that platform has become a monopoly? I think that's a good argument to combat that point, too.
I mean, if a platform has become a monopoly, then we can talk about antitrust laws, we can talk about things like this, but you cannot enforce a platform to just have all content on it. It's, it's an anti-First Amendment argument. I mean,
I'm still trying to understand, why do people keep pretending as if Facebook is a private platform? Like, it's not.
Because the definition
it's
of
not.
private
They literally have former CIA agents working within Facebook. Facebook goes into Congress, comes up with a bunch of nonsense after they get accused of something, and somehow, some way, they always end up coming out on top. In fact, it is literally a law that is allowing them to act as arbiters of truthful or false information, because of a law that it's protecting them. And whenever anyone goes to try and change it, they are the ones who have the money to then influence politicians. Not that they even have to, but they have the money to influence politicians to make sure that that law that they are benefiting from continues to allow them to then influence the outcome of elections in one form or another. At the end of the day, when they constantly act on behalf of the government, especially when it seems that there is a partisan agenda involved, when they go to the government and get exactly what they want, they're not being held accountable like other private institutions have been held accountable. At what point do we stop pretending that words mean, that private and public mean whatever they say it means, when they're clearly acting as a public arm of the government?
So, that's a conversation we get into. So private means not government. It means privately owned. Facebook is a privately owned company. It's not owned by the government. If you want to have a conversation about whether or not Section 230 should be repealed, which it shouldn't be, if you want to have a conversation about whether or not platforms should be allowed to moderate their content, which they absolutely should be, if you want to have a conversation about whether or not you should be allowed to lobby the government, I think most of us agree you probably should be to some limited extent. Those are all great conversations to have, but the idea that just because a private company lobbies the government, they're somehow not
Are you
private.
familiar with InQtel? Do you know what InQtel is?
Don't need to
The CIA's venture capitalist firm in Arlington, Virginia. Basically, I can go through the whole way they did it, but basically Peter Thiel and InQtel invested into Facebook. That's how Facebook became what it was and overtook MySpace. And this is a thing that we've seen InQtel do because they have unlimited funding sources. Another example I can give you is how Google came out of nowhere and overtook Yahoo. It's because InQtel had unlimited money to ensure that Google was able to overtake Yahoo. That's how Amazon went from being a failed business platform, a failed business model, and eBay was destroying them. And then out of nowhere, where Jeff Bezos inexplicably becomes the most wealthy man in the world. That's how Tesla was a failed business, relying only and exclusively on our subsidies. And then now Elon Musk is the most successful man in the world. So my point is, the reason Facebook has hit the peak that it's hit is because of the government.
Shut up, Steve.
So even though it's private, it's just once again, it's just another way to rebrand public, but they just don't call it that.
Well, beyond if you want to have a conversation about whether or not some subsidy for electric vehicles should be repealed, if you want to have a conversation about whether some people should be allowed to privately invest in a company,
no. I just said the government literally created
the problem is that
no, because you're doing Destiny. What we're not going to do today. So here's what we're not going to do today. You're not going to try to poke holes about shit that nobody's talking about. I said the government had their venture capitalist firm invest in a private company where no one else could compete. That's what we're talking about.
When you say something along the lines of like, how did Amazon, Jeff Bezos became a millionaire overnight?
I didn't say how. I gave you the reason as to why.
Bezos became a billionaire overnight.
I didn't say how. I didn't ask how.
It's because everybody in this room probably uses Amazon Prime. Everybody in this room probably buys shit off Amazon. Everybody in this room probably uses Amazon Video. Like, we know why these companies become huge because they offer products that everybody in society uses. If you want to talk about repealing an individual law, if you want to talk about repealing an individual law,
please tell me one company that can compete with unlimited funding from the government.
You can. Nobody's getting unlimited funding.
What
from
the
the
fuck?
government.
I told you. Do you look
Moderator, do something. I can't hear shit.
Talking to me about specific subsidies that exist for these companies. If you want to argue,
we gotta go to the next question.
Argue
We gotta go to the next question.
But let's hear it out. Conspiracy.
All right.
1 second, let me cut in. Let's hear from the Marxists.
Oh, now you cut it.
Yeah. Well, see, the purpose of the
fuck?
state is to uphold class relations, right?
Go on.
Yeah. So that's
I'm the moderator. I'm not allowed to agree.
Anyway, the purpose of the state
Wait,
is
there's
to
a
uphold class
Marxist?
relations. Fundamental
Lol.
difference between two classes: owner, not owner. Right? Facebook is an owner. They benefit from all the action that the state does. Ultimately, I'm going to have to side with Nico on this. Like, it's going to be either through state subsidies, either through investment, either through any of that, that Facebook gains its dominance, that Amazon gains its dominance. Again, it was just a dumb bookstore in the 1990s that was nearing the, if you remember the .com bubble. They were going to go down with that. Why didn't they? That's in my opinion, that's really the question here.
I'm
it's
gonna-
100%. Yeah, I'm just basically with you on this.
Like, the only way you can invest into SpaceX is to buy stocks in Google. And SpaceX is literally basically owned by the Pentagon now. So, like, that's a coincidence?
So is your argument that because government has undue influences over these social media entities, that therefore they're obstructing free speech, but not directly through law, but indirectly through company policy?
Yeah, where they don't have to be held accountable for what they do.
What do you mean by that? They don't have to be held accountable.
The government can't be held accountable for something because people like Destiny are going to come up here and make an argument saying, no, that's just a private company. That's not the government doing that.
Destiny,
the
why do
government
that?
is literally letting them skate at every turn, no matter how much information gets put on them, no matter how much people find out they're using their monopoly to influence the outcome of politics. But then when we go and try to hold anybody accountable, the government just ultimately gives Facebook what they want again, and then Facebook just starts the metaverse. And
So the reason why nobody is held accountable is because at the end of the day, all we do is we go online and we shitpost about how horrible these companies are, but you can't actually point to a piece of legislation that you'd want repealed. You can't point to some actual
We could
action
literally
they've
just
taken.
reform 230.
You can't. If you want to talk about 230, you can. Repealing 230 would lead to an
I didn't say
unbelievable...
so I didn't say repeal.
We can talk about reforming 230.
I said
Reforming
we
230.
can reform 230.
Sure, you can reform 230. That's probably going to destroy every single new website that would ever...
Why would it do that when you can just reform it and make sure it doesn't do that?
Okay,
Destiny,
how would you want to reform? Give me a sample. You can scream all you want. It doesn't make you any smarter. It doesn't make your point any more clear.
Tell us how you want to reform 230. It destroys your argument.
Tell us how you want to reform 230.
I said reform. We can talk about how the reform should look, but it's not going to destroy all future websites.
Tell us
You're
how
being
you want to reform
ridiculous.
230.
You're being
Give me a sample reform. Give me a sample reform.
You're being ridiculous, bro. Come on.
No, I'm asking. I want to know a sample reform of 230.
Ariel whispered to me that we should express
Oh,
what Section
fuck
230
again.
is. So it's, quote, no provider or use of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider.
Yay.
I had to look that up, by the way. I didn't know what that was.
Another
so,
one.
I'm glad that you said it for people that also don't know what that was. Didn't know
So
what that was.
that's Section 230, which gives them certain immunities, right? So
What is the 230 reform that we're looking for?
As long as
so
they're
how do
acting
you want to
within that
change it?
bubble.
Do you want to repeal it, or how should
No,
we
you would
alter
reform
230?
it to make exceptions in cases like Facebook, for example,
Well,
where
thing
they're
is-
acting as publishers, but then
Facebook
you got
doesn't
a whole.
publish-
So then you allow people to sue them as if you were suing a CNN or an MSNBC or a Fox News. Currently, you cannot. That's the problem.
How is it so the entire backbone of the internet, from IRC chats to bulletin message boards in the 80s to GeoCities websites in the 2000s. The only reason why websites can exist is because they require immunity from being sued if they have user-generated content on their platform.
No.
Can I finish one sentence? Holy shit. Okay, you don't want it so that anytime somebody posts something on your website, you can get sued for what another user uploads on your site. If that is the case,
that's not what we're talking about.
That absolutely
Where
is
do
what
you just
you're talking
invent
about.
these fake realities in your head?
There's a reason why
we're talking about
you're
Facebook being held accountable for removing people's content, nobody
in the legal community and nobody in the online internet community.
You're talking about random shit postings.
Nobody is talking about reforming 230.
It's a little bit loud and echoey.
So,
so try not to talk over each other.
Reforming 230 would destroy anybody's ability to start any new internet website where you have user-generated content, because as soon as you can hold a website liable for what users are posting, just because you want to engage in moderation, should you not be allowed to moderate your communities? If you want to make a message board for right-leaning people or for feminists, do you not have the ability to moderate your communities that way? Of course you should be able to do that without being held liable as a publisher or something of information. And these websites, just because they engage in moderation, doesn't make them a publisher. That's ridiculous. To try to say that because somebody puts up a fact check or because somebody puts up or bans certain types of content, they become all of a sudden a publisher of information. What do you think it means to publish something?
When you were getting fun,
when
you were go ahead.
Yeah, I think here's a problem though. They're not just a neutral platform.
They don't have to be neutral.
Oh, really?
Yes, really, yeah.
Yes,
of course. So let's hear why they don't have to be.
Because that's the law. You're not obligated. There is no we just talked about the First Amendment. If you started a private platform where you brought people on to speak, do you think that the First Amendment means that you have to let every single person come on? That's a violation of your First Amendment rights. If I start a forum and I want to talk about how cool dogs are, am I legally obligated to let cat lovers come and shut my forum up with how great their animal? It doesn't make any sense. Of course you don't have to be a neutral platform. Do you think Fox News is a neutral platform? Do you think CNN is a neutral platform? No,
you can sue Fox News and CNN.
You can sue Fox News
you can literally
for
sue
things that are said on Fox News.
If they lie, you can sue them. If they defame you can sue them. If they slander you, you can sue them. That's the difference. When Facebook takes I'll give you an example of consequences. So recently, in Texas actually, a man's son died after taking the vaccine. He was 16 years old, the son was. When he posted a GoFundMe to pay for the funeral, GoFundMe removes him.
You don't have a constitutional right to post on GoFundMe. I'm sorry.
Because of that, obviously it becomes much more difficult to fundraise for that funeral. Now, why did they remove him? It's a literal fact that the vaccine caused this man's son's death, but they're saying because it's spreading vaccine misinformation that he can't fundraise there, because then, of course, we bring attention to the fact that there might be side effects. Facebook removed people for saying that hydroxychloroquine was a legitimate solution, or at least to help while we're waiting for vaccines when it came to COVID. And then doctors were banned. People died. Fucking Destiny people died.
First of all,
no, what I'm telling you is that there are real consequences when you are removing people because you're pretending to be an arbiter of
This guy is so
information
good at Giz
when you're
gathering.
literally
Holy
removing
shit.
experts. It's one thing if you moderate the
debate,
content by
bro.
saying this isn't allowed, you give them a strike. But if you think that they should be removed, then you go through the fucking court of law and you hold them accountable there. And if someone has decided that you are overtly or accidentally causing problems that could lead to mass conflict or violence or whatever, then you allow the courts to settle it. But what you're suggesting is that we should allow this entity that has gotten unlimited funding from the government.
They don't.
Where you can't, to a point where now you can no longer actually have competition against them.
All right, Nico, let's hear a rebuttal now.
So everything about hydroxychloroquine has been proven to be ineffective.
Bullshit.
The fact that you
Bullshit.
bring that up, can I finish? Are you going to scream over me every time I start counteracting the bullshit you say?
Give him a chance.
I need 10 minutes to go through every fucking stupid thing you just said.
Go ahead.
So number one, hydroxychloroquine is the worst example of anything you brought up of. Okay, number one. Number two, if a private platform wants to ban somebody from their community for any reason, They're allowed to do that. You do not have a constitutional right to post on fucking GoFundMe. Just like any person in this audience doesn't have a constitutional right to come up on, I know you want to talk. Nobody in this audience has a constitutional right to come up here and grab a microphone and scream at somebody. That's part of your First Amendment privilege. If you start a platform,
How are those two things analogous?
You are
How are
allowed
those
to
two things
moderate.
analogous?
You are allowed to moderate that content in any way that you see fit. The idea
Am I-
that you are
am I receiving
obligated-
unlimited money from the
idea that you are
CIA?
Obligated. The
Am I-
idea that
am
you
I
are
receiving unlimited money?
Let him go.
The idea that you are obligated to host all forms of content on your website is a delusional fantasy. I don't know where it
Oh
came
my
from.
God,
I don't know where
chill.
people got this idea from. There's no case law that supports this. There's no legislation that supports this. There's no constitutional amendment that supports this. It is absolute delusion.
No.
that you
There's
would
literally
hate
a
this,
law
okay?
that says
so
if
if
you
anybody
act as
wants
a
to,
pub-
bro, you can't cut me off 30 times
okay,
after
let's
talking
take
a whole
an
bunch of shit for
example.
like 5 minutes.
Okay,
Wait, can I finish responding?
Yeah.
Holy shit, yeah. So if a website decides that they want to moderate their content in the way that they see fit, if they want to ban doctors, if they want to ban experts, if they don't want you to do your whatever fucking GoFundMe, that's completely and totally within their right to do so. And just because they don't want to host your content doesn't mean you can go cry to the federal government and say, I have a right, I have a constitutional right to this platform. That's an insane reading of how the First Amendment works.
Pause.
No, I don't need to
We're not
pause
talking
off,
about
but I will finish.
We're not talking
and now
about the
I'm done
First
talking.
Amendment.
Okay,
We're
so
talking
if you wanna
about
talk, that's fine.
literally Section 230 protects you only and exclusively if you're
What
not
a
behaving
Sigma.
as a publisher. So another
Bingo.
great example would be the Hunter Biden situation, where every single time a Hunter Biden article
I
would come
didn't know.
out, people were getting banned. People were literally
So, like,
losing
you mean Twitter?
a
Twitter
business.
stopping the link to the. New
Oh,
York
not just
Post
Twitter.
article.
Facebook, Twitter. My friend got banned from Facebook for 7 days. Another one of my friends got removed for
Moderating
posting
is not
an
publishing.
article from mainstream media about Biden on Facebook with no context. Banned. Now, all of a sudden, you're banning people not because the information is wrong, just because you don't like what's being put out there. Now, that's what we call editing.
shit.
That is editorial. That is publishing, which means you should
Why
be
do you
able to
think
be
Twitter-
pause. You should be able to be held accountable, but you cannot be because you're hiding behind 230.
Why did Twitter ban the Hunter Biden article?
Motherfucker, please explain it to me because we would love to know.
Wait, you brought it up, so you should know.
Why
about
did
it.
they
So
ban
tell
it?
me. You tell me.
We're literally trying to find out.
I like it.
We're not trying. It's public information, so you don't know.
Why
I want
they
to hear
ban
you
it?
say, I have no fucking idea why Twitter banned
You
it.
don't even know which article I'm referring to right
I know
now,
exactly
but go
which
ahead.
one. I know exactly what you're referring to.
Which one?
So tell me. You tell me. You brought it
No,
up first.
no, you just said you know exactly what it is. Go ahead.
Why are you trying to posture right now? You brought up the example. so
You
I want to
just
explain
literally
to
cut me
everybody
off to
here.
ask.
You
just
cut
want
me
to know
off?
the
Oh,
answer.
no.
You know the reason
So
why.
you don't know why
I'm
it
telling
was.
you,
You don't know
if
why.
you
Okay.
know why it was
So
banned,
I'll
please
explain.
enlighten
I
us.
will explain.
All right,
So
let me-
Twitter, wait. So Twitter has a specific policy for hacked materials where if you
What
upload
the
wasn't hacked.
something on,
fuck?
if you upload
It literally wasn't hacked.
If you did Hunter Biden approve of those images and everything from the laptop being posted?
It wasn't hacked.
And it's a hacked material.
It literally wasn't
so
hacked.
Twitter has also banned people on the left.
USB.
You're just gonna keep
Here you
talking over me
go.
like that makes you correct?
You got it. You got it.
I'm right here, dude. You don't have to look at the
It's a
audience.
USB.
Hey, talk
They
to me.
handed
You don't
it
have to
over
look at the
here.
audience.
They were like,
Come on,
hey,
Nico.
post this.
Hey.
New York Times. Is New York Times banned for posting hacked
Let him
material?
rebut, and then we're getting to the next question.
I'm right here. I don't know what you're
Is
looking
the
at
New
there
York
for. Are you
Times
talking to
banned
somebody
for-
else right now?
I'm trying to understand.
Are you lost?
I wasn't going to answer my
I think
question.
you have like a monitor out there
Is the
somewhere
New
where
York
you can
Times
see a picture
banned
here?
for posting hacked materials? Because last time I checked, they did it all the time.
But Nico, we get the point. You got to let him respond.
But that's my point.
yeah, I'm
is,
right here.
Hey, you are not understanding the lack of consistency.
I understand completely.
That's
You
the
just
ity.
had no idea
You're
what
telling
you
me what the rule
There
is,
was
but they won't
consistency.
explain why they don't
There
consistently follow the
was
fucking rule.
consistency, Because
that's
one,
the problem.
Does
you
anyone in
wanted
the
to
audience have a
discuss-
Xanax?
If you wanted to discuss the Hunter Biden story or post the Hunter Biden story, you were absolutely allowed to, as long as you didn't link to a website that had hacked materials listed on it. Number one, and I know that because I discussed it on Twitter and I get banned. Number one, okay. Number two, there was a left-leaning group that leaked a whole bunch of like police materials, part of the big ACAB thing. I think it was like a year prior,
This
and
is
they got banned for
insane.
doing the exact same type of thing. This particular story is not a story of political bias. It's a story where you, who has a clear political narrative, has taken one story, completely misrepresented it, and then try to pretend that it supports
Is
your
New York
side of the
Times
political narrative.
banned
That's exactly
for
what it
posting
is.
hacked material?
Okay,
so is the answer? It's a yes or no question.
Yes,
It's yes.
if you post.
No, they're not. They post WikiLeaks leaked material. They have not been banned. What are you talking about?
If you are,
CNN did it.
hey,
Then Trump's
Nico,
taxes
you-
just get
why-
leaked and
why-
got posted.
I'm right
Those
here.
are hacked
I'm
materials,
right here.
correct?
I'm right here.
Okay, that's what I
I'm
thought.
right here.
So the problem isn't that they are taking their right to enforce their rules. What we're trying to figure out is why are you inconsistently forcing rules? What do you do when those rules are being forced inconsistently and they're supporting a certain political agenda while undermining another. And then at that point, when does that not make you a publisher? And if it does make you a publisher, why can you not be held to the same level of accountability as an actual publisher?
Let's
it's very
take this.
simple.
let's attack this from a slightly different angle. I'm gonna ask Ariel what she thinks of this. So in 2019, Cedric Richmond, U.S. Congressman from Louisiana, warned Facebook and Google that they had better restrict what he and his colleagues saw as harmful content or face regulation. Quote, he said, "We're gonna make it swift. We're gonna make it strong. We're gonna hold them accountable. Figure it out because you don't want us to figure it out for you." And Jerry Nadler added to that, "Let's just see what happens if I pressure them." Is this worrying to you that the people that are governing their content moderation are influenced by congressmen? Ariel, what do you think? Is that like a skirt around the First Amendment, or what's your thoughts?
I think that anybody that has power is going to try to control more. That's just the fact, right? That happens throughout history. It worries me when people use that power to silence people. Like that's like that's the concept of this panel, right?
Yeah.
I think that I do agree partially with what he's saying. I understand where he's coming from with Stephen. And I think that if you do have your own platform, yes, you can moderate content in a way because if there's like pornography or something, you don't want that, yes. But I also think people are taking that to the extreme and making it political. And just because they don't like something, you know, they're removing that. I don't think that's a healthy way for this country to be going.
Do you feel like the government has an undue influence on what Facebook is doing?
Oh yeah, I do. I think this is just me personally, but I think that it's fairly obvious to me that Facebook has some kind of secret agreement, whatever, I don't know, with the Democratic Party, because and YouTube too. I mean, I speak from personal experience. I know that until I came out, I was posting the same content for 10 years on YouTube. Sexual education, until I came out as leaving the left and being a non-leftist, then they started banning me and restricting me. So to me, that's my experience of what you're saying, and I don't think, obviously, I'm biased,
and
but I don't think that's okay.
What was the reason? Did they say that you were causing harm? I mean, is it
They said it was because of my sexually explicit content, but I've been posting that same content for 10 years. So to me, it's okay, they don't like what I'm saying now.
Okay. What about you, Stephen?
But yeah, I do think it's because that's to me, it's too obvious. It was too obvious to me that this is why it was happening.
Right. So, Stephen, what do you think? If there's a link between the government, senators pushing these guys, doesn't that not apply? Isn't that the government using abridging the First Amendment in the wrong way?
I mean, I think it would depend on what they're pushing for or what the implication is. If the implication is that if this behavior is going on that leads to some sort of harm and we're going to legislate a new law or we're going to enforce a law in the book about it, that's probably fine. That's what Congress is there for. But if it's something like we're pressuring you to censor certain political narratives or whatever, then that's probably not okay. I will say though, again, a platform has the right, even if they want to ban, Republicans or Democrats on their platform, it's within their right to do so as a social media platform.
Yeah, now, and I agree with you.
Sure.
I don't think it's good, but I think that by law they should be able to.
Sure,
I don't
and
think,
I agree 100% with that.
I don't think it's a
the
good thing for the country,
of,
though.
Depending on the platform, censoring of conservative speech or whatever online, it sucks because it makes it more boring for me because I like to shout at people and I don't have as many people shout at
Do you
online
think
anymore.
230 is fine the way it is? You think 230 is fine the way it is? No changes?
I don't think 230 is fine. I think 230 is essential for the internet to function the way that it does. Without 230 written as is, you lose. The new world going forward is every single platform would have to moderate every single comment posted, knowing that they might get in trouble for the reason why 230 came about was that when certain platforms were moderating their content, the idea was that, well, hold on, if you're going to ban some stuff and not other stuff, you're basically tacitly approving of other stuff that's being posted, so we can sue you for that. And so people were starting to take websites to court for stuff that their users had posted on the site.
Yeah.
If I posted defamatory content of anybody on this stage, you shouldn't be able to sue the platform that I posted on. You should sue me for it, right? That's the essential protection that 230 provides so that websites can continue to exist while allowing user-generated content to flourish on their sites.
Well, the difference between the two things is whether it's a provider or a publisher. And there are a lot of things that Facebook does that make it a publisher. It is not specifically just a provider. The algorithmic way that they sort content, they prioritize certain types of content, they push certain types of content, and whether it's because of a political agenda or because it's the content that makes them more money. And I understand that that's probably something that is built in. It is going to be a contradiction that you're not going to be able to get rid of anytime soon. But in a lot of cases, Facebook is acting as a publisher rather than a provider.
So this is just not true. So people have tried to stretch. Well, I'm about to answer that. So people have tried to stretch this idea that if you have an algorithm that shows certain information, or if you do like a fact check, or if you moderate certain content, that this makes you a publisher. It is very clear, like a publisher is somebody that publishes information. So if Facebook were to start writing articles, or if Twitter were to start writing articles and they were pushing these or whatever, then those 230 Live...
What's an op-ed page?
What?
What is an op-ed page in a newspaper? Does New York Times, like Mr. New York Times, write everything there? Or do other people do it?
An op-ed page, my understanding is that on that, you would be liable for that, but that's because you're publishing what's on the op-ed page. You're like approaching a writer and you're saying, we're going to hire you or pay you for this like op-ed, and we're going to publish it in our magazine. Now,
hiring and paying is irrelevant.
If Twitter payment is essential. It might be
no, it is not.
Depending on what we're talking.
Absolutely not.
Do you understand that there is a difference between a newspaper that solicits op-eds from people versus a platform where any user more or less can sign up and generate content?
He said hiring and pay is irrelevant.
Yeah, hiring and pay is irrelevant. And Facebook is soliciting content from us, sorting it and putting it out based on their own preferences.
Yes.
Daily Coast, for example, you didn't have to be it's like a blog, which is a very sophisticated blog before it became what it became. So like, no, hiring and pay is relevant, but Daily Coast could still be sued. Huh? Yeah, you see the difference?
My understanding is that if you have a website where any person can just submit content willy-nilly, if it's like some WordPress site, some blog or whatever, like Medium, for instance, you can't sue Medium for somebody that writes an article on Medium, because Medium is not like the publisher, it's just a distribution platform for that article. Now, even if you've got an algorithm that sorts stuff, like you might like this, you might like that, or even if you ban stuff like we don't want this, we don't like that, that still doesn't make them a publisher of the information. But they're just a content distribution network.
Does it
it's a CDN that somebody uses for user-generated content to show up on their website. The content all comes from people, not endemic to the company.
So, well, we don't know if Medium could be sued. Maybe they could. We don't know. Like, honestly,
we don't know what?
We don't know if Medium can or can't be sued. No one has ever attempted to, because
we do know because
they don't arbitrarily remove people's information just because it doesn't agree with a certain political agenda. To my knowledge, I've never heard any complaints about
removing
that.
information that doesn't agree with a political agenda doesn't mean you lose your Section 230 protections.
Oh my God,
I don't think you've let me finish a single thing, so I have very little
sympathy
for you.
Bro,
what do you want to say, Nico?
Let me finish talking. I'll just let you pontificate for a fucking hour as usual. Let me talk.
Oh yeah, man.
Anyway, so like I was saying, we don't know that about Medium. But
we do know that. That's right.
Then we can get to the actual precedent that has been set, because people are like, oh, these private platforms like Twitter or Facebook have the ability to just remove politicians whenever they feel like it. Actually, the courts say otherwise, because Trump couldn't even ban someone because he is technically a public figure and they considered it to be a public forum. They couldn't even. So if you obviously,
no, that's wrong. That's not even true.
Hold on, let me finish talking, Mr. Judge. Like I didn't know you were a damn federal judge.
I don't have to judge.
Okay, then anyway, let me finish talking. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Anyway, so just from the precedent that's already been set by the court, they said, and it was like it was a leftist decision. Like Democrats were like, you can't block us, ha ha.
Anytime they don't agree.
It is. Hold on, let me finish.
Okay.
Jesus Christ,
how many dumb things can you say? It's like a fucking machine gun.
This is not your Twitch stream. Chill.
All right, we got to get to it.
Anyway,
it is his Twitch stream.
When Trump got banned from Twitter, that was probably the most egregious form of censorship that we had ever seen, because literally the outcome of an election could or could not have been affected by it. When you are talking about because this is America, right? So if the outcome of our election is affected by, which that means you're affecting the outcome of the geopolitical arena all over the world. And there is literally no accountability, ironically, in the same country where everybody's talking about election interference all the time.
But so could a movie, right?
Yeah, but you could, if the movie influences it, you have a choice whether or not you want to engage with that content. Like, they don't funnel it to you. They don't force you to go there. But if I have a business, if I have like my political opinion, if I don't, when you have a business that is reliant on Twitter and Facebook because they are, okay, we just went through this. Okay, so once again, unlimited funding. There is no
there is no unlimited funding from the government. I don't think you know what funding or unlimited means. I don't think you know what either of those words mean.
Because you don't like the logic that's about to come doesn't mean
it's not about logic. You don't know what a publicly traded company is.
We're already at the unlimited funding. Like,
well, that's what I'm saying. So
Facebook is a utility. It's like roads. right? So he's saying like
Facebook's not regulated like YouTube.
I've learned
You're asking.
nothing.
He's making the argument that Facebook is essential to launch a business in the modern world. In the many ways, like roads, like to restrict a business access to roads, we all agree that's BS.
You literally can't
But
find
is
competition.
Facebook is it as essential as roads?
I don't disagree that these platforms have a lot of power. So I have questions about how antitrust works in the United States. A really good question, in my opinion, is why the fuck was Facebook allowed to buy Instagram? That shit is crazy to me. I think that if you want to attack some of these larger social media platforms from an antitrust perspective, that is absolutely legitimate.
And then what?
Because it is really hard to start. Let's say that you're banned from Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. What public voice do you have? Right? You're not on fucking Gab.
What?
No offense, I'm sorry, but like, right?
We
You're completely fucked. I absolutely agree. But you have to hit this from an angle that makes sense, not this crazy shit about how they have unlimited funding from the government and blah, 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 and all the made up.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
What you have to say, what you have to say is,
because they're
you have to
private,
say we
they're
need to look at the way our
literally
Can't hear.
antitrust
Moderator.
then you attack that angle.
Moderator.
Views, and you're like, let's affect the antitrust law. Well, if
I don't
you
think we have a
remove
moderator.
Antitrust laws, Destiny. Do you know it's going to completely and utterly destroy how we battle monopolies now? You see how fucking ridiculous that is?
No, Destiny just said that Facebook shouldn't have been able to buy Instagram.
Yeah, but that's my point. He's like, we should then refund the antitrust law to make sure that can't happen. But if you reform it, oh my God, then we can't handle antitrust issues like we handle them now. Like, no, that sounds ridiculous. You can. I was about to say something very vulgar, but basically you can do two. You can walk and chew gum at the same time.
It's not about walking and chewing gum at the same time. You're pointing at things and calling them problems, and they're not problems.
You can reform 230 while protecting the things that we.
Okay, what do you want?
What
do you want to do?
What is it?
A little bit of both.
What's
But I can't hear anything.
specifically?
One, it's either
Just shouting.
You either reform 230 or you admit that platforms like Facebook and Twitter no
How
longer.
would you
Oh,
reform
hold on,
230?
let me fucking finish. Oh my
Every
God.
time they ramble, it's because they don't have
Bro,
shit to say.
shut up.
Every fucking
Jesus
time.
Christ.
It's like it's the same
Dog,
script. Holy
if
shit.
you like, okay, you know what?
But one at a time. No, we have to
Yes,
dissect the
yeah.
430. All right, Peter.
It's
what do
fine.
you want to do
have
to
nothing
230?
to say. You can get mad all you want.
You're
I'm sorry
surgeon.
that you have to actually answer a question for once in your fucking life. It's fine. Like we can sit here and we can cry all day about like, oh, 230 unfair, blah 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 blah. Tell us how you'd reform it. Oh, there you go. Go ahead, pick it
So
up.
like I
Go ahead, let us hear it.
So like I was saying, I want to reform. You can reform it by one, protecting the benefits that we have now, but make sure that if a company decides to act like a publisher like Facebook and Twitter have done in situations especially that affect the outcome of our political atmosphere, like you can literally legislate it. It'll go through the committee process, they'll figure it out, make sure it works. Who will be affected? Who can be positively affected? Who can be negatively affected? They go through a process. I don't know if you heard about it.
I don't owe you
That's what
shit.
Congress does.
What does it mean to
And
act
it's-
like a
hold on.
publisher?
Oh my
Okay.
God.
What the
bro.
fuck?
Just 5 fucking seconds, bro. Anyway, once we get through that, when we get to that point, we can do a breakdown of what's the best way to ensure that one, they're not doing it, but even if we can't control them for doing it, make sure that if you're removing someone's literal brand, business, whatever, that you have to go through the same due process as everybody else. But right now they're being shielded from due process and accountability on their behalf, and then we're not getting any
So
due
how
process when we
do
get
we
screwed.
get around that? Peter, how would you, if you're a surgeon, what do you do to 230?
Well, for me, like, these are the two options. Either you recognize that Facebook, Twitter, and all these things are acting as publishers and not as ISPs. Like this law is actually designed around the relationship an ISP has with the customer as opposed to just websites. It's applied to websites because websites ostensibly act in at least somewhat neutral way. I think that has been overstepped, and we can either recognize that and apply 230 to them as it exists now, or 230 needs to be amended in order to recognize that.
But how?
How? I can't give you exact wording. I'm not.
Well,
a
what does
lawyer.
it mean to be a publisher? That's what I want to know. Because we're saying if you're going to act as a publisher, what does that mean
I
to be a
thought you were
publisher?
the expert on 230. It tells you in the.
What?
I thought you were the
Yeah,
expert.
okay, what does it mean to be a publisher?
230 is
Ariel?
like, it's like
Ariel.
27 words. What do you mean? It doesn't tell you in there what it means to be a publisher.
All right,
He literally just read it. Yeah.
Ariel, what's it mean to be a publisher?
I think that's the issue
I like
that
it.
this debate is having. I think both people are explaining it differently.
No.
Now,
No, I don't think they are.
is being a publisher simply posting something online, or is it also? Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. Or is it controlling what's being seen in the world? I think there's a case for both. I think both are equally as important because
what about-
you could post things like just. I mean, it happens with the algorithm with YouTube all the time. If they don't like what we're saying, they restrict us.
Sure.
And I think that is, in essence, also being a publisher because you are controlling what is being seen.
Sure, like Stephen points out that like the New York Times op-ed's clearly like that's a publishing practice, right? But what about on your content if you say something like trans women aren't women, or you said something different about COVID and they said this article is misleading? Like, is that publishing?
I don't think that's publishing. I think it's
editorial content.
I think it's editing. I think it's editing, and I think people can interpret that as publishing. I think it's all interpretation. I think everyone's going to interpret it differently. That's the issue. That's why we have debates about this, right?
What do you think, Stephen? Is that?
I think that this is one of those things that seems plainly obvious unless you're taking a hardcore political bend to it. If you have a platform and users are supplying all of the content to that platform, you have a right to moderate it as you see fit. If you want to like force people or attach like a not safe for work or not safe for life link, if you want to say warning, like we think this contains bad fit or whatever, or you want to say that like this violates whatever rule or whatever, you have the right to do that. That doesn't mean that you are suddenly like creating and publishing content on your platform. I think there's case law to support this. The EFF has a huge write-up on how they feel about 230, and a whole bunch of other institutions have signed on. People like Medium have signed on to support 230, written as is well. I mean, like the idea that just because you engage in some moderation, or if you want a front page like the cutest dog pic of the day, you've become an editor or a publisher. If we were to take that point of view, what we're essentially restricting is every single platform has to just show all of their content in a straight line with like no other like flourishes or whatever. Otherwise, you're engaging in publishing or editorializing.
Don't you have to weigh the benefits and like?
So I
think he makes a lot of sense in that with that point,
Go ahead.
because you are also a business and you want to make sure your business is doing the best that it can, and if that means putting certain content first because that's going to get the best, you know, the more clicks or keep people on the site for longer, that makes sense, and I get why YouTube does that as well. I just think it's reached a point where, to me, it would be considered censorship and not no longer. I think just for me, their line has been crossed, but I understand. I
just don't like the word censorship because like.
Come up with a better word then.
Well, the problem is
I'll use that word.
The problem is that contextually, these mean very different things, right? If I'm not allowed to call my dad the F word, if I'm a 9-year-old at my house, I'm being censored by my parents. That is true. Is it good or bad? It's probably okay. If you're not allowed to say crazy stuff in a classroom, if you're like in 5th grade, you're not allowed to scream swear. That's censorship, right? If I'm on a private company, if I were to start screaming at you really big obscenities, eventually I imagine you'd have me removed from the stage, right? That's a form of censorship. Now, if the government were to craft legislation that was abridging my right to freedom of speech, that's also censorship. One of these is really, really, really bad, and the other 3 examples are probably okay things that ought to be protected in society.
So the main issue I feel like is that we're losing the context of is like the consequences of the inconsistent application of punishment and censorship and removal of people. It's one thing if I saw like, you know, CNN or MSNBC getting the same type of treatment as maybe an Alex Jones, for example, probably wouldn't be all that concerned. I'm like, well, shit, man, that's just the way it happens sometimes. I would still have a problem with it because I'm a free speech absolutist, but it would be hard for me to find an argument that says they're treating people unfairly and it seems to be based on a political agenda. We all sat through Russiagate. I think everybody was there for that, where they lied, not once, not twice, but for years. It cost people jobs, friendships, breakdowns in relationships, and it turned out to all be complete and total bullshit. And if you go and look up, like, and you see some of the articles that came out, they were like, they had the CNN employees that got caught saying, like, yeah, this is BS. Nobody actually believes this. They were doing it for money. That's what their claim was. And the moment that became an issue, like, that was everybody's moment to step back, like, wow, so hold up. Not only were they lying, not only were they full of it, but it was for money, and they weren't punished for it. There is no incentive for them to then tell the truth at any point because they know that they will always be able to benefit from Twitter, from Facebook, and from the government as long as the right people are in power and they're doing what the government wants. So you now have this vicious cycle of fuckery that no one is being held accounted for because they know whatever applies to you doesn't apply to me as long as I keep playing the people who are in power, as long as I keep playing their game. That's how we're in the shit we're in right now because of the selective accountability. If I can be held more accountable than
what's
a
the accountability?
that's
like,
a
Peter,
problem.
What would you want? What would you want, like, if there's accountability for these people? Like, what does that, what's that look like?
I mean, you can see, if you think that one of these companies has engaged in behavior that is like illegal or malicious, and you can prove that in a court of law, you can take them to court and sue them.
Oh,
CNN has gotten to. Oh my God! I'm sorry. Did I just interrupt your interruption with my answer to his question? I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah, so you can take CNN to court if you feel like they've published a story that's wrong. There was a really popular story like 4 or 5 years ago. I'm sure everybody in here saw it. It was like some white high school kids that were outside, and there were, I think, Nation of Islam people. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that family took CNN to court, and they got a decent settlement out of it, which they should have because that whole story was bullshit.
What
and
the
the way that it was edited
What does that have to do
was
with
absolutely-
Facebook?
What is that? What, you
We're
just
talking- I just said CNN can be
I can walk you
sued.
through it.
That's
No, that's fine. If we want to spend the
He's
time.
talking about accountability.
You said there was no accountability.
No.
And
What I
I'm
said
showing
was
to you is that if you take
CNN
somebody
can
into
be
court and sue
sued,
them, some people would
MSNBC
call
can
that
be
accountability.
sued.
All right.
That's what I was
Facebook
saying, okay?
cannot. What are you talking about?
The only
We're not
one
having the same conversation.
the only ones winning when we're talking over each other is like the echo. So go ahead. You were gonna
No, I
summarize
was just going to say he's talking about accountability. I think that is one way of people being held accountable. I don't think necessarily it needs to. I don't think we need to start suing people to be held accountable, though.
We're talking
to
about
have those people be
we're
held
talking about
accountable.
social media platforms in the inconsistent application of accountability.
Yes.
Like that's so I don't know what you're talking about. I already
Because
said
you brought up
We
CNN.
already know
You brought up
CNN.
CNN. That's not a social
because
media
I said
platform.
on these platforms, on YouTube, which is owned by Google, which is owned by the CIA, on Facebook, which right, it literally is, bro. You can just look the shit up.
Well,
It's
no,
not
for
complicated to find.
For example,
You think Google is
it's
owned?
not-
You think
it's
Google's
not-
owned by the
look,
CIA?
Bro, I'm
Okay,
not gonna do
all
your
right.
homework for you. You should do it before you got here.
But
anyway,
what I think he's trying to
Is that
say
like a
is
51%
Nick Sandman
majority stake, or what is
successfully
it?
sued
Say it
CNN for
again.
libel. Nick
Say it.
Sandman successfully sued CNN for libel. So he's saying accountability is there are methods for this.
Suing CNN for libel isn't CNN being treated like you or I on Facebook or Twitter, which are two of the most powerful platforms in the world that have unlimited sources
I have a good way of, in my opinion, holding people accountable. I think that people like Facebook, or like businesses and companies like Facebook or Twitter or whatever, should be honest and upfront about their political biases. I think that's one way to do it, because then going in and you're going on these websites, you know that their feed might be tailored a little bit more to people left-leaning or right-leaning. And I think that the Daily Wire does that. They literally say, we are a conservative news source. So people know going in that they're going to be...
But those are all publishers, right? And they all can be held accountable to a degree, Facebook and Twitter. That's it.
Yeah.
Everything that you're saying is true, but then Facebook will turn around and say, we're not publishers. What are you talking about?
All right, so take an example.
Yeah.
So on Section 230, to modify that, like I haven't gotten a ton of specifics, but Vivek Ramashay, I maybe butchered his name, the guy that wrote Woke Inc. What he says to do on Section 30 or 230 is to guide it by the First Amendment. So they would not get liability anytime they're outside of the bounds of the First Amendment. So they can censor content, for example, that the First Amendment doesn't protect, which would be like your child pornography, threats of violence, libel, and all that. But everything else, they would have to do in the spirit. Or they could choose to be a publisher and lose the liability. What do you think about that?
It's like it seems weird. It's like paradoxical. Enforcing that a business follows the First Amendment is contrary to the purpose of the First Amendment. This is the reason why anytime you participate in any private business, if you go into any restaurant, if you go into any private anything, there's always that line on the bottom of, we reserve the right to remove you for whatever reason we see fit. Part of your ability to run a private business in the United States is that you can exercise your private level of discretion in any way you want, as long as it doesn't move contrary to like protected classes, for instance. You
Bro,
can't
I'm gonna lie,
discriminate
that's
on
not like
the
the same argument
basis of,
that was made
you
for
can't discriminate on the.
slavery.
Oh my God, I'm sorry. Was I interrupting your thoughts again?
That's morally
Did we leave
bad.
the coloring
It's
books
violating-
backstage?
It violates
I don't-
the Constitution. As long as you're private. If you're a private company, it's cool.
That's exactly what. Yes. Welcome to the First Amendment. That's exactly how it works. The
restaurant's
First
not the
Amendment does
same
not
thing as
apply
a
to
social
private
platform.
enterprise. That's not what the First Amendment is.
People make arguments where they pretend as if they could undermine the First Amendment, and then they usually, if everything goes well, get crushed in court later and sued for it.
Okay, so Peter brings up a restaurant is not the same as
Yeah, a
Facebook.
restaurant's
So
not the same. You're talking
would a
about
limit?
patrons.
What about a company size liability limit that you get protection if you're small enough, but if you're big enough, different rules apply?
This is like an interesting argument. So again, though, the problem is like there's either two things going on here. Either one, in my opinion, we should be talking about antitrust law, which I think there are way more better conversations to have. Or two, you're essentially saying that once a company grows to a certain size, there's like a whole other set of like constitutional provisions that come in to moderate or guide that company. I mean, you could, but that gets into like a whole lot of really
it's
weird.
not a constitutional provision. It's
What?
a law. It's just a law. Section 230 is a law.
I would also argue that
Or I thought you were mentioning more specifically like the First Amendment.
I'd also argue that quantitatively is not necessarily a good way to figure this out. I think it's really like when you look at Facebook or Twitter or any of that, there's a tiny percentage of posts that they spend their time pushing and boosting or moderating for that matter. I think it's really are they acting in a manner that like they are very, very heavily curating their site in terms of what they boost? That makes them
I have a very possibly, I don't know if this makes complete sense, but to me, I think the argument can like be summed up in like as book burning. Like people are allowed to publish, but then people are denying those publishings to be seen, right? Is that kind of where we're at? Is that what both of you are saying? Yes, people are allowed to publish on Facebook, but is Facebook also becoming a publisher?
They do. Like
that would be the book burning, right? Yeah, they allowed them to produce the books, but they're also burning them, right? So they're also hiding some information from being seen.
Yeah,
is that technically a publisher? I don't know how to answer that. I don't think I don't know if any of us do.
If you are like curating information and like, or what just came out recently, even blue checks, right, on Facebook, they got caught whitelisting certain celebrities and certain political figures and basically blacklisting others. Like, when, once again, in the grand scheme, what is that actually doing? That is influencing not only political narratives, but social narratives as well, and it is disallowing open discourse, which is fine if you're CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. Because once again, if somebody is allowed to lie, like outright lie about me on CNN and MSNBC, if somebody does that, I can sue them, and I have a pretty good chance of winning. If I supposedly pushed a lie about Hunter Biden, which is kind of hard to lie about that guy, like, but hell, fuck that. Even if I tell the truth about Hunter Biden, I can get banned off of Facebook.
So you're
right?
saying like these big companies can't be political?
Let me finish.
Is that your argument?
If I can push a lie about Hunter Biden and get removed, but then Hunter Biden can then log on Facebook, push a lie about me, and nothing happens, there is a problem. And that's what we have seen done consistently over and over and over again. And we keep getting into the weeds about, what about antitrust laws? There is no difference between addressing antitrust laws and 230s. Maybe we have two different methods of dealing with the issue. Hold on, let me finish. Yeah. We have two different methods of dealing with the issue, and that's fine. We can have those differences. But we both agree that this is inherently a problem. And what I am telling you is the root of the problem is, which is something that you keep ignoring conveniently, is the fact that you're having unlimited funding from the government, prop up countries where there are, companies where there are no competition for that, and then there are real life consequences that are felt because of the government funding.
So too much money. There's one person. There's one other person on the stage that would have a good solution for
this.
Right.
I would say, how will antitrust solve the problem? Because I think what you're saying is let's solve it. How does antitrust solve it?
So the only way to solve the problem the way that you're addressing it is like the Marxist solution, which is you're saying that private companies should have some greater obligation to their like public operation. If that's the case, then they need to be owned and held publicly by the government, and then they need to be regulated in that way as a utility.
Well,
that's the ultimate end
morally,
goal of what you are pushing for.
You can't get away with shit you shouldn't be getting away with.
Actually,
if you did all your crimes,
is it like a prop bet that he took? How many times did he come
What's the CIA for? What is the CIA for?
How many times
does the CIA just like, hey guys, let's let you know
how many shares does the CIA own of Facebook? How many shares does the CIA own of Google?
Before we come and overthrow you. No. If you're doing
like the CIA hedge fund or what?
We're officially measuring.
Does Biden go down to the New York Stock Exchange and execute these trades, or does he send his son down to do it?
Do your dirt out in the open. When you have congressmen threatening Amazon, threatening different companies, if you even
gotta let him make the argument.
Trump, I didn't get to finish making my argument. When you
talking, you weren't done.
Finish, bro.
Okay, I'm so
I'll
sorry.
let you say all the dumb shit that you want to say. Let me finish. So like I was saying, when you have politicians
to be clear, you didn't let me finish saying anything.
But Twitter,
that's where we're
and
at.
then threaten, say, we will use our legislative power to force you to do something if you don't do it yourself, and then without any process,
we gotta finish this argument.
Parler gets removed from app stores, and then no one gets held accountable when we find out, oh shit, maybe we did this the wrong way. Like, politicians shouldn't be able to fucking skip steps in the legislative process and have presidents removed from platforms. That is insanity. There's no justification for that. And why did they get away with it? Because the government is who is allowing the shit to happen. And as long as you do what the government wants, who no one trusts, then you won't be held accountable.
There you go. We're going to pull the mic in a second. Like, seriously, you finished the argument about your antitrust. How does antitrust? So first, you got the argument that unless the marketing control. So how does antitrust fix it? Finish your argument.
I mean, like, so I think that you can look at the amount of market share that a certain company owns in an area, and if it's too great, then But then I think the company needs to be broken up. Now the problem is I think people try to argue like how broad the areas should be. So I don't quote me on this, but when Facebook took over Instagram, they were trying to make an argument that like, well, we occupy totally different spaces. It's not similar at all, so that's why we should be allowed to acquire them. So, but I think there's like a point to be made that if you want to do, if you want to start a company of some kind, and you're not allowed to list yourself on Facebook, you could suffer like a real material harm by just not having access to that one platform. If that's the case, that there are no competitors that are adequate to counter that single platform, I mean, if antitrust laws exist for any reason, I feel like that would be the reason they exist, right? That if I get banned off one place, I have no access to this entire market. That seems like a good place
so
to
the
make
obvious
it.
example that at least comes to my mind is in Parler, right? So Parler comes, they get big enough, and immediately they're delisted off Google Play and the Apple Store, and they lose Amazon Web Services. So it's now I guess you got to create your own internet, right? Because it was before kind of create your own social media. Does your antitrust solution stop what would have happened to Parler?
Well, so the weird thing is that we're getting into we're testing the limits of how like private enterprise could be allowed to work, because cancel culture has reached the point to where like you want to try to like it used to be a long time ago that they would just try to get you banned from one social media platform. Now they want to get you banned from every social media platform. Now they might want to get you banned from social media platforms and like having a domain name and get your the people that host your shit banned. Like it wouldn't surprise me at some point they try to get you banned from like getting apartment people to like lease you an apartment because they don't like you so much, right? I think this is the problem. Now the problem is that all of these things are technically protected like First Amendment rights, but what we're hitting on is like these really weird limits of like how effective is capitalism at allocating resources to society, and then people following through on that. Because, and here's the thing that nobody wants to hear. The reason why these platforms are so big is because everybody wants them that way. Every single person in here probably has some highly integrated Google device or Apple device where they've got like AirPods that connect to their phone, that connects to their computer, that connects to their fucking email, that connects to their school, that connects to their fucking car.
I love MySpace. I was perfectly fine with
When everybody
MySpace.
is obsessed with that level of vertical and sometimes horizontal integration, you're going to see these companies get as big as they are.
Yeah.
And that's a problem that like it needs to be regulated. But Nico said something correct earlier, which is that it's really hard to regulate it. But the problem is it's not hard to regulate it because the government is corrupt and bought out and blah, blah, blah. The problem is that it's hard to regulate. The problem is that it's hard to regulate it because people sometimes don't really know what they want. Another great example is people talk about invasion of privacy all the time. Our privacy is being invaded. Our privacy is being invaded. Motherfucker, you can like dox somebody by looking at one Reddit post. They're talking about like, oh, like my name is like, you know, Peter Thomas and here's my Facebook account. It's like, bro, you post everything about yourself online. You use all of these services. You give all your information up, but that's because they like the convenience that they get from utilizing these products. So yeah, I agree that these situations are hard to regulate, but it's because people all the time don't know what they want as well. It's really complicated to figure out like how big should a company be, how much reach should it have, because how much convenience are we willing to get in exchange for some of our privacy, safety, freedom.
All right, go ahead.
Like I feel like that's just kind of like insulting people by saying, oh, they don't know what they want. No, people like don't want to be fucking censored. People on eBay didn't want to like get sideswiped out of literally nowhere by unlimited funding to Amazon and Jeff Bezos, which is once again what allowed Jeff Bezos to become the richest man in the world after having a failed business model. Like people who are working at Yahoo and having the time of their life and making cool commercials. Everybody remembers those. Like there was a time where you couldn't even imagine a world where Yahoo wasn't the #1 search engine, and then out of nowhere, once again, Google just, oh man, we just have a better business model by doing the exact same thing as you do, but worse at first. They weren't even as good as Yahoo. But somehow they also ended up making Google Maps because that was also for the government, and that's why most of the world doesn't even allow Google Maps because CIA just uses it to spy on people.
Most of the world?
Hold on, let me finish, please.
Have you ever been to another country before? What?
Yeah, they don't
Why
allow
wouldn't
Google
antitrust
Maps.
help?
Wait, which country?
Have you ever been to a country that isn't in fucking Europe?
So yeah, sure. I've been to New Zealand. I've been to Taiwan. I've been to, yeah, of course. What do you mean, South Korea? These,
bro. like what? Anyway, so like I was saying.
But how does antitrust like?
Oh, he was about to say it. Let's say it.
Facebook shouldn't have been allowed
Say
to buy
idiot.
Instagram. That would be part of the problem. That decentralizes it more.
Yeah,
Why
then we have to get to. See, that's the problem. We keep talking about part of the problem. I've already given you the root of the problem. Why was Facebook allowed to buy Instagram?
Okay, but the root
because the government allowed them to.
All right, but
because it served their interest.
Holy shit.
The most from all of these mergers.
But what
if you just look at the election,
what can you agree on Like other than like the root is so deep in your thing.
We
We have
should
to tear it all down.
I
I hear where the unlimited funding comes from.
laws
That's
have
what
been
I'm curious
shit
about
for
right
a while. Once we saw the 96 communications bill go through, and then like all of radio and all the companies got basically bought up by the major four or five companies. Like we knew then our antitrust laws no longer work, but somehow they just keep getting allowed to be played. And so what basically Destiny is asking us is, hey everybody, trust your government to do the right thing.
Well,
how's that working out for everybody so far?
I mean, he seems, to be fair, he seems distrustful of the big companies buying up and getting too big.
I just don't like it. People don't recognize where the problems come from. If you don't like the media, if you don't like big companies, I'm sorry, but it's a mirror. It's a reflection of what the citizens want. It absolutely
it's not.
is.
It's not true.
It absolutely
Absolutely
is.
not true.
You can get as mad as you want about it. We live in a democratically elected society. People keep electing these politicians.
I need you to get out for Twitch and go talk to people. Because people tell you what they want if you go talk
Yeah,
to
and then
them.
the use
They
of
don't
the
want to be
Facebook, the
censored.
Gmail.
Motherfuckers did not like Joe Biden. And somehow he is in power, right? I don't give a damn who you were. He was the #1 target on the debate stage for a reason. Because he was the most vulnerable, because no one liked him. Nobody. But somehow, some way, he becomes a president anyway. Or who everybody
Holy
by the
shit, this
George
guy.
Bush administration didn't like George Bush. And then somehow, some way, he gets paraded back in front of us. And everybody's like, oh my God. Actually, I do kind of like George Bush now. We get told what we wanted through propaganda.
You gotta let
know
him.
this. Well, you gotta let me.
You can't play
finish that
tennis
thought.
with one person, man. Like you gotta let them back in.
I let them finish their thoughts.
I love
wanna be able to
that
finish my thoughts.
Biden won and stole the election with a Republican
I'm not
government,
talking about
with
stolen,
Republican
stealing the
federal
election. That's
judges,
not what I'm talking
with
about.
Republicans looking at every step of the way. Somehow he was
You're
able to get
literally,
through
you're
it.
like the tennis guy that's running and hitting your own balls.
Well, shit,
Like,
I can
you
do
gotta-
that. I'm not good. But I'm not talking about stealing the election. I'm talking about, you're saying people do. They
What the fuck did you just say
then?
then?
The government and the private institutions react to it. No, we know, like, propaganda is a thing. Like, did you read about the 80s? Like Cold War?
Basic,
Huh?
I don't
But
know.
that sounds like an argument for censorship.
Why would that? No,
Because
no,
you're
no.
saying
when you don't agree with
what
what
I
propaganda
can
is.
then go out and tell the truth about that propaganda. I guarantee you, send me
Okay,
in a
but
room with
what's
Destiny.
propaganda?
Send me in a room with Destiny when he's spewing bullshit. I will tell you why it's bullshit, and you will know the right and correct way to go about solving issues. This is why we have these conversations.
So, if you could make one tweak, what would you do?
I don't want to
Just
mention
like
it, but Ariella? Ariel. Okay. There was a suggestion that you hit on earlier that I think would be a really good thing. I don't know if you would legislate it, but at the very least we should hold everybody accountable to it. I think that when you remove anything from your platform, I think that the ban reason should be publicly stated. That's like one thing that I would really, really, really like. There are some platforms that have done this. There was one Kickstarter or something, I think, where sometimes when they remove like really charged content, even if you don't agree with it, they'll put a video out saying why they did it. I think that would be an awesome level of transparency so that if we can see stuff is getting removed, at least we know why it's getting removed.
And then we can make the decision if we want to continue supporting the platform.
Exactly, yeah.
So, and then the way to get there would be how?
I don't know how I feel about legislating it, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Like if that did go through legislatively, I don't think I could see like it would be really abused or horrible. I think I'd be okay with that.
Okay.
If it was like a thing where like if you're a public platform, or not a public platform, but if you're a platform that allows users to post on it and you're going to remove content, at the very least you have to state the reason why.
Okay, but you'd prefer it to be more of a cultural push, but you're okay with legislation.
Culturally, we failed.
Okay.
So,
all right.
There's a reason why these platforms are so big. Everybody wants to be where everybody else is, right?
Got
It's
it.
why cities are so big. Everybody wants to move where everybody else is. Like no offense, but nobody wants to post on Gab because that's not where all the people are posting. So people will say in one breath, I wish these companies were broken up, or I wish they weren't monopolies. But in the next breath, they want to be able to post and have 300 million users have access to their public messages.
Well, that's not totally true for Jangles. He lives in the sticks. Where do you, if you make one
It's
change?
actually a similar one to that. I think that they should have to publish how they are judging what they are doing in terms of content. How are they censoring content?
Yeah,
How
that's
are
what I
they
said in the
pushing
beginning,
content?
yeah.
If the model is something that is majority, like much more heavily weighted towards them promoting a small amount of the content, I think that should put them in a different place in terms of their relationship to Section 330.
Okay. Do you feel like they should be more open with their algorithms?
Yes, absolutely.
That's what I said. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that would solve a lot of problems. And I don't agree with everything Ben Shapiro says, but he did say that he thinks the same thing. That's where I got the idea from. He says that his media companies, Daily Wire, says straight up, we are a conservative news source. So naturally, we're going to be a little bit more biased. And I understand that going in. Okay, when I see these articles, I know that that's where their mindset's coming from. They're not claiming to be in the middle.
What does
They're
that
not
look
claiming-
like, though?
I'm not sure. We're figuring that out as we go, I think.
But like
it could be
some
like
kind of
posting
statement.
like this is your cleared TOS, and then like you would like reference like this is banned because it violated 1 subsection 2A or whatever, right?
Okay. So you get what if you could change
Ooh.
one thing,
Nice.
right? I don't know if we
What
could
the
go
fuck?
to the root, but if you could change one thing, what do you change?
Like I mean, yeah, I guess you could do the thing where you show why you banned them, but that's not going to change anything. It has to be the accountability. You have to hit people in their pockets for them to pay attention, or threaten them with losing their business.
What does that look like?
So in the case of let's just say Facebook, for example, when they remove like Alex Jones, if they would have given a reason and then say this is exactly how we got the community, this is what the community got. I say this is what he did in this specific instance, and that's what got him banned. And then it turned out that wasn't true, and then Alex could take them to court for that ban, and they could actually feel it. Like that would be. But they, obviously they can't. But if they actually were able to get hit in their pockets consistently and often for wrongful bans, that would solve.
So
a lot
you
of
want a
issues.
penalty for wrongful bans?
Yeah.
But how do you determine then what's wrongful?
I mean, that's what a court of law is for. If they're doing their job.
Mr. Moderator. All right, we're gonna have to start getting into our QA. Yeah. We can start the QA.
All right, no, yeah. Start Q&A.
Worst moderator.
Anybody have any
you.
questions for any of our panelists?
Oh,
All right, you guys can go ahead and line up right up here.
For some reason,
Please try to keep it to one question if you can. Keep it nice and brief so everybody gets a chance.
So there were a lot of different reasons to go in and I guess regulate these companies. I think the big thing that we discussed was
you got to get really close to these things.
I think the big thing that we discussed was the publishers. So what would your bright line or standard be for considering someone a publisher or not? Because if you talk about like Facebook or something, you kind of would have to like go into their code and algorithm, and that's kind of like their own personal property. So like how would you be able to determine that?
So like a more defined like idea of what a publisher is.
Somebody that like writes and contributes to their platform like in a meaningful original way. So if you're writing your own tweets, you're writing your own articles and posting them or whatever, you're like publishing those articles.
That's a content creator though. That's not a publisher.
What is the difference?
Well, does Penguin Books write all the book? Does they write? No, authors do. It's a publisher is the larger umbrella that all of these content creators.
That's getting the messages out.
You and me are technically content creators as
Yeah.
well as anyone else who's tweeting. But here's the thing: if we had a TOS that outlined exactly what goes into that I think would be because. People who are getting banned off of things and they have something to do with the TOS, you at least can expect that type of a thing to happen. Let's say they violate, X rule on the TOS. Whereas if you also had this sort of unwritten set of rules where you're either promoted or demoted or you're also subject to even disappearing. I've known people who have been disappeared off these platforms without any real violation of rules. They haven't had anything articulated to them. That, in my opinion, especially if it's the majority of what they do, if it's a minority of what they do, I don't know. But if a large portion of their business model is pushing and demoting content based on whether or not it's in their interests, that to me says publisher rather than just provider.
Quick rebuttal.
So I think there's a difference because when you talk about a book publisher, it's not just user-generated content of people that get signed to a site. There's usually an implied relationship. If you're being published by a certain publisher, unless there are some open publishers out there, there's some collaborative effort there where you've kind of endorsed the message to some extent by being a publisher for a certain person.
Yeah, but when you push certain content and a large amount of content is just totally ignored by these standards, when you push certain content, you start acting in that way.
Yeah, but then the question is should you not be allowed to ever do that if you're considered a publisher? Let's say I had a website that did
I think you should be, but I think you have to.
You have to have some
You
liability.
have to say. I think you have to say upfront. This is why we're not
sure, that's fine.
promoting
That's okay.
these types of people.
Because if I had a dog of the day post, am I held liable now? Because do I lose those protections because I'm favoring some
before
pictures?
Facebook and Twitter publishers, the thing that made them different than just a platform you post on is that New York Times allows and disallows content. And they edit and censor content on their website after it goes through a clearing process, and then you're likely going to be told why you weren't allowed to post that op-ed or that column. Whereas on Facebook, when they enter the game, it was post whatever you want. That's what you're allowed to do. But then when you get to the level of you can post and they can see your post, but we don't like what you're saying, so they can't see your post.
Okay. So then
that's like it's you're behaving as a publisher while basically trying to undercut what a publisher, like what it has meant to be a publisher up until this point because of how elastic the laws have been.
All right, go ahead, Michael.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon.
Morning.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's the wrong time of day. It is, in fact, the afternoon. A lot of this debate seems to surround around issues of the First Amendment. How do we square the First Amendment with private property rights? I'm reminded of a debate we had in previous generations about something called the Fairness Doctrine, which was this doctrine which stipulated that radio had to cater to both sides of the political aisle in due fairness. And the number one people who argued against that were conservatives, saying that this was a violation of some property rights from these radio shows. Simultaneously, conservatives all over the country are trying to ban the teaching of critical race theory in classrooms. It seems like conservatives are the biggest pioneers of censorship, right? So how can I trust conservative voices, or maybe I should say any voices that are trying to repeal Section 230 to be neutral in the application of this and not to just build a safe space for conservatives?
So I think the question is, would the reinstantation, or whatever, if we put the Fairness Doctrine back, would that help it?
Well, the Fairness Doctrine isn't explicitly like they're required to show both sides of an issue. They're required to attempt to show more than just a simple.
They're required to have parity. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, did I say fair use? I'm sorry. I meant Fairness Doctrine.
No, the Fairness Doctrine is you have to have parity.
Do you like the Fairness Doctrine?
No, that's fair use.
Did you guys like it? You want it?
I think
you want
that
it back?
the Fairness Doctrine was an inelegant solution for the problem that it was attempting to address, because it actually did not obligate dissident politics. It was just a mechanism that people could complain to the FCC if indeed they didn't agree with it, which meant that if there was nobody actually holding the station accountable, they weren't really required in any way.
So it didn't have any teeth?
Yeah.
It had teeth. You could be sued.
Do you guys like it, Fairness Doctrine?
I don't have strong opinions.
We would have to. So I would like it. You would have to strengthen it, because there was like Tulsi actually introduced legislation on it while she was running. And it was to strengthen it, and then because Obama was the one who actually repealed it.
Oh, I don't know what the language of the law was, but the idea was both sides.
It was what, 2014?
It sounds like a
when he
garbage,
did it?
but I don't know the implementation or how it was like.
It's like allowing propaganda where you don't have to have any parity, and obviously the parity isn't going to be perfect. But then once again, then you can take it to a court of law if you feel like it isn't good enough, and then hash it out in court. We get all the discovery and the documents, and now the people can then be a fair judge. And hopefully, if you do need to be held accountable, you can.
All right. So next question.
How's it going, y'all? Nico, I think you mentioned earlier that the banning of Trump off of Twitter had like major geopolitical implications. Do you believe that there's a line? So, for instance, if the president were posting child porn or inciting a riot or something like that, do you think that Twitter has the right to be able to ban people like him off the platform?
If a president was to post child pornography, that's against the law. And so you could then, I feel like that's a good question.
But power.
Yeah, no, well, because that's what he said. So like, but it's true, like, right? So if he's posting that, then he is literally breaking a law. Not only should he get banned, but then he should be taken to court, and they should figure out how many years they should be giving him. Hopefully more than what they have been giving. But when you get to the situation, like for example, inciting a riot. So now you're in a gray area, because what does that actually mean? Like, for example, is Travis Scott going to be charged for the 8 deaths that he may have caused last night at his concert?
Hopefully.
We don't know. But there are courts to have that discussion. In Twitter and Facebook, if I'm not mistaken, none of their executives are a federal judge or a Supreme Court judge, and nor are they going to have a conversation, and nor is there going to be any due process applied. So if we want to see accountability there, then you go through the due process to make sure that it's being done the right way and publicly rather than behind closed doors.
Wrong way.
Okay, next question.
Hey, my name is Sean. Hey. So my question, you're all on YouTube, I believe, and I have
get close to that mic, man.
So I have a question about, in particular, in regards to misinformation, disinformation. I haven't heard too much discussion about that tonight, but in particular, what YouTube content creators are kind of having to self-censorship, and the left and the right is being deplatformed. This is going both ways. You know, I think it may have been served, or someone has recently been banned for debunking misinformation about the vaccines, and he was just trying to, follow the guidelines. But so, where do you think that these platforms are headed in terms, are we going to be constantly self-censoring for the next 10, 20 years? Is there a solution that we can, that people can feel more comfortable talking about things that shouldn't necessarily be banned from discussions in like the open space?
I just actually got banned recently, last week, because I had quoted verbatim a mainstream media article about the vaccines. And I don't know if you all posted on YouTube, so you probably got the update, where they basically said that it actually isn't about, you can get banned, and it isn't about whether or not you're right or wrong anymore, or if it's factual or inaccurate. It's, does it disagree with the institutions that they trust, but more importantly, is it the consensus? And so now you have obviously so much that's left up to so much interpretation that we couldn't possibly know what that even means anymore, because the institutions disagree with themselves every week, and the consensus is changing every week. So what they're now using is they're taking advantage of it and saying, well, we're just going to ban anyone who is talking about it. Because I like for example, I'm pretty sure me and the Surfs are not on the same page when it comes to mandates and the vaccinations, but somehow they'll receive the same punishment as me, and I don't think that they should be removed off of YouTube no more than I should. And so it's going to eventually leak over into everyone else. I'm a black man. I don't know if y'all know that. But we have this saying. Yeah, no, man, it's crazy.
I'm
we
totally
have this saying,
colorblind.
We have this saying in the black community that we're just the test subjects. Whatever happens to us will absolutely happen to everyone else eventually. And that's what happens. So.
What do you think over here, like in regards especially to like the medical discussions, because expert consensus in medicine is the lowest form of evidence, right? But it seems to be established with this restrictions around this to much higher credibility than it is. Like, is that a problem?
I don't have a good answer to this. I would say that, in my opinion, I think that misinformation is actually the biggest problem facing the Western world today, our inability to agree on what is factually true, because from that stems an infinite number of disagreements. We live in epistemically different worlds. Like, people believe totally different things, right? You know, some people believe that if you get vaccinated, you'll never get infected by anything and you're safe from every disease, and other people think that if you get vaccinated, you've got an 80% chance of getting myocarditis and dying. Like, the worlds that we live in are worlds apart right now. In terms of how do you address that, I mean,
what's
like,
worse?
What?
What's worse, the misinformation or potentially not allowing legit information to get top? Because the fringe theory could be the mainstream. So
it could be, but I mean, like,
that's why we believe in conspiracy theories. Because why aren't they allowing these?
Yeah, people
these other
die.
information? Why aren't they allowing this other information?
Ivermectin for a year and a half, 2 years, it is like turns out to be a Nobel Prize, like one of the safest drugs ever. They had all the studies in other countries.
Ivermectin is not a safe drug. Ivermectin is not a safe drug to treat.
It's one thing to worry about censoring misinformation. It's something else entirely to then restrict legitimate information from experts because they disagree with the narrative.
So real quick, so ivermectin is not a safe drug to treat the coronavirus. That is not true. Number one.
All right, doctor.
That's not true.
All right, Dr. Bonnell.
All right, let's move on. Number one.
That's fair, and then you wouldn't. We would. I believe my body, my choice.
Wait, hold on. I'm actually curious. Do you know what ivermectin is prescribed for?
River blindness, parasites. It actually has been prescribed for COVID all over Florida. That's why everybody's moving there.
So what did it win the Nobel Prize for?
What did it win the Nobel Prize for? For treating for virus. Actually, it had multiple applications.
It was for anti-parasitic infection.
Yeah.
So
okay.
The idea that
do you know why it works for? I'm not having.
No, I do. Actually, go ahead. No, we can talk about this all you want.
My point is that there are certain studies, just like there are some studies that support the vaccines, that also supported that ivermectin. Yeah, even if it had minimal positive effect, it was far more safe and proven and tested over time, and people did not have that option where there wasn't a vaccine. And so if it could have saved someone's life, it didn't, because it was being banned based off of information being put out.
So ivermectin,
and the information that was considered to be on the fringe. That
I'm not going to we're gonna argue over the science of this.
That's not true.
My point is, are the consequences from suppressing potentially legitimate information could cost lives. That's my
The problem is this misunderstanding that like we're gonna find truth on fucking YouTube when it comes to like medical information. Like that's chances
there are literally doctors on YouTube. What are you talking about?
Chances
Why
doctors
not? There
are
are multiple doctors on YouTube.
A doctor,
like actual doctors, not like fake Twitch doctors.
Who is he talking
real
to?
doctors.
Wait, who is he talking to right now?
I'm talking to
multiple doctors. Multiple doctors does not make research.
Watches YouTube.
Multiple doctors does not make scientific consensus.
Maybe YouTube should be held to publisher standards.
Next question, go.
I swear to God, this was my question before all that started. All right, so it's mostly to Nico, but it's for anyone else on the panel. Let's say in a hypothetical scenario, there was some sort of global pandemic. And let's say that hypothetically misinformation was being spread on social media platforms that, if followed, would reasonably result in bodily harm or death. Should social media platforms do anything about that? And what would that look like if they should?
So I don't think it should be social media platforms that get to decide whether or not information is or isn't legitimate. Because once again, everyone believed, for example, like that hydroxychloroquine and zinc was a problem, and then CNN had to retract their article. The Lancet, which is supposed to be the super prestigious medical journal, had to remove their study because it turned out to be BS after a Harvard MD who works in the emergency room called them out, and then no one could replicate their study. But policies were crafted because of it. Social media reacted to it and then never backtracked their reaction. There's some doubling down since. And people have once again died because they didn't have the potential to have access while they were waiting for a vaccine. So the social media generally, I don't believe they have the heads of these social media companies. They have the best interests of the powerful who pay them off and who they can pay in Congress at their heart. That's who they're worried about. They're not worried about us.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be social media's job. It should be everyone gets to put information out there, and then you have these groups, and you choose based off the information available what is the correct solution. But what we've seen historically, like with marijuana, for example, the same people who've pushed lies about hydroxychloroquine, or ivermectin, or interferon alpha 2B, were also telling us marijuana was going to fucking kill us. Remember? So, and they were wrong. But why did they do it? Because of the agenda. So it's the same agenda that may be disallowing things to come out, or also could be the agenda that is why they're purporting lies about things that they're saying is good for you, or good or not good for you. So the answer is no. They should never be in charge of that. They should allow the information to flow.
Do you think
freely.
like those biased narratives are curtailing the truth?
That the what scenarios?
The biased narratives, the
Yes.
idea, like an agenda.
I do. I have friends that work in the medical industry, and I know what goes on behind the scenes.
Well,
And
Capital
I've had,
has. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I've worked in the medical industry. I used to work in pharmaceutical advertising before I was a YouTuber, and I know what people will say to sell drugs. So I know that there are narratives, and the narrative is money in this case, and we just have to be aware of it.
Pfizer was
Does it worry you, Stephen? Does it worry you, Stephen?
So I think that, I don't know if I would say that legislatively it should be a law, but at the very least there should be like a moral and then enforced culturally, like an obligation for these private social media companies to try to do some sort of fact checking on their platform, because like the rampant misinformation is just so unbelievably societally and physically destructive.
We definitely agree on that.
I think fact checking would be a great thing.
Sorry.
Definitely agree.
Fact checking? No, I think everybody agrees fact checking would be a great thing. It's just we don't trust the fact checkers.
Yeah,
I think that's the argument on this side.
There's influence. There's money in that.
Right.
Like in terms of like even with medical studies, there's capital who is able to write grants to these people and not to these people based on their agenda. That's just how self-interest works.
Isn't 80% of the FDA funded by pharmaceutical companies, right? Roughly, right? And then Pfizer was the #1 donator they were #1 lobbying. I think number.
Well, we can get into like corruption in the FDA later.
We gotta go to the next question. We gotta go to the next
ask
question.
that exact question. Let's do the next question.
Next question.
Hello. Go.
Man bun. Checkered shirt. Let's go.
Right. So Nico, this is a question for you. So I'm.
Oh, you said me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So like the board of directors at most companies, they're going to have like,
Someone say
a
my
fiduciary
name?
responsibility to like seek profit for their shareholders, and they usually get.
Say that again. Can you speak a little bit?
So the board of directors at every company is going to have a fiduciary responsibility, like legally, to the shareholders to seek profit. Now, most conservatives, I feel like, would agree this is a good thing in most industries because it requires them to make decisions that are going to, make the most money, follow the like invisible hand of the market, all those things they believe in with, arguments for capitalism. So it's just interesting because they would like make approvals on the terms of service usually at most of these websites. So they're making decisions on like what they ban based off of what's going to make them the most money. Like there's a reason that BitChute is not as big as like YouTube at this point. So what I'm finding inconsistent is, do you want to like promote free markets and follow
Yes,
that, or
come
are
on,
you trying
don't be
to,
bad.
like,
Nine.
intervene in the market where it's only convenient for
That's okay.
your side of the
Let me just
political
say, you know not of what you speak, Jon Snow.
I was thinking the same thing.
Nah, but
It really does look like that.
One of the reasons that you really do. One of the reasons that BitChute or any company or platform isn't as big as YouTube is because there is literally no way to be bigger than YouTube. If you would be, Google could then just harm you in the algorithm so that no one ever finds you because they receive unlimited money from the government. I need everybody to understand this concept. They don't have competition because there is no competition for black funding. So like black market funding, which is effectively what they're doing with InQtel.
Dark money.
Dark money. I mean, I
Can
wish.
you explain the unlimited money thing? I really want to know.
No, they literally get unlimited money. Yeah, you can't keep track of it.
It's an infinity sign.
So in a vacuum, I would agree that it would be a good thing for people to craft their terms and services based off of what would make the most money. But what you have though is like Facebook and Twitter both do things where they know it will hurt the engagement, which is actually how they make the most money. And they don't have to worry about the consequences because they are eternally shielded from those consequences because they're doing the agenda of whoever's in power at the time. So they don't ever have to be held accountable as long as they're following to that agenda, and then they still make money regardless. So I would love a free market in this particular case. The problem is it isn't truly a free market, and that's not obviously with just social media or censorship. It's with everything now.
Okay. All right. And next question, and direct it to somebody on the panel. We're going to try to get them all, but we can't really have too much discussion. So pick who you want, and then your question.
Anybody, up for grabs. Any radio station, any television station, any cell phone provider, anything that goes through the airwaves are dictated to be public property. So you have to have a license for the frequency that you broadcast on. Could the private property public company issue be ameliorated if you just said that the internet itself was like the airwaves and that it is public property and these private companies become in their own fiscal interest, if they want to grow, once they get to a certain scale, then they reach certain levels of regulation?
I think or what you're saying is like kind of switch the technology to go to airwaves so you don't have this like yeah, but how would you store content though? Like you still need Amazon Web Services.
Their broadcast towers for radio stations are privately owned.
I guess, but
servers for DirecTV.
Wait, so what is the question whether or not it should all be regulated like the airwaves are? Then,
yeah.
It's
regulated
just
like the
hypothetical.
airwaves are actually broadcast through the airwaves.
What?
Regulated through the airwaves are actually broadcast through the airwaves.
I don't understand what you mean.
He's asking you. Like, as the question you're asking, should it be regulated like airwaves have been, or should it be, you're saying that the internet should be broadcast through airwaves? I guess that's what.
Just regulated, because obviously it's not broadcast through it.
The communications bill kind of killed the way that they were regulated before.
Yeah, that's
They're not regulated anymore effectively. So.
But yeah, it's kind of weird too in a different industry. I
don't want like all of the internet to have to like be like no profanity, no obscenities, no pornography. Like that sounds like a pretty boring place.
Yeah, you'd be screwed.
But you're talking about like as a public, like basically this is a public sphere and like everything can be regulated as if you. I don't know what you. I don't believe it's a public good.
All right, next question. We're ticking here. Fire away, Justin.
Next.
And make sure you're
question.
Hey, handsome.
Getting coronavirus
hey, you
by
handsome
putting
with
the
suspenders.
mic. Yeah. Do what Ariel did. Get real close to the mic.
Okay, so this is for Peter and Nico. So do you believe that companies should have the right of freedom of speech? And if so, do you understand that what you're advocating for is going to be restricting the freedom of speech?
How?
Well, telling them that, these companies shouldn't be able to ban these people for talking about COVID-19 or talking about taking ivermectin, whatever. Telling those companies that they shouldn't be able to ban those people, isn't that restricting their freedom of speech?
Well, yes. In some ways, I agree with you, actually, on that. I don't know that I actually 100% think that one way or the other, as things are today, in a world where there is ownership that is very specifically concentrated among a few people and everybody else is not the same thing. I don't know that there is like an explicit, simple solution for it. So what I'm advocating for isn't necessarily just totally like, hey, you can censor whatever you want. I don't want that. I want the decisions to be made based on these sort of rational rules, which Section 230 ultimately is a rational rule. The problem is that I don't think that these companies are acting explicitly as just platforms. I think illegal stuff, like threatening stuff, that stuff, if like they have in their terms of service, you're not supposed to do this. I think that they're within their right not to have that there. I just think that if we're in the more like political freedom of speech area and we have companies that are basing much more of their model on boosting or de-emphasizing certain content, then they should be looked at closer, not necessarily exactly the same, but closer to like a newspaper or a New York Times or somebody who solicits content and publishes it, as opposed to somebody who is just allowing people to say whatever they want on their platform.
And I would say that saying that you don't want people to restrict free speech is in violation of the First Amendment. It's upholding it. Like if for example, I'm a journalist, I work for RT News. If I get banned, then my First Amendment rights, and this is what we're seeing over and over again, journalists, verified accounts getting banned for doing their job, like you're literally violating freedom of the press. And it's like, if I say I don't want that to happen, then I'm actually against the First Amendment. That doesn't really follow. Say that again? Well, then once again, then when that corporation stops getting unlimited funding from the government, then I guess we can have a different conversation.
But he's saying they're too intertwined. All right, next question.
This one is directly for Stephen. Stephen, you've said before that one of the issues with our consumption is that viewers demand the type of content that enriches companies. Given that they also use algorithms to make their content much more engaging and addictive, would you be in favor of a Pigovian tax or a tax on negative externalities on excess viewer engagement? And do you think that would be an effective way to curb the excess influence of big tech and content companies?
I'm rephrasing this because it's hard to hear sometimes. So are you saying that if companies are motivated to get you as hooked or engaged as possible into their content, are there negative externalities related to that should be curbed with some sort of federal legislation?
Yes, specifically a tax of some sort.
That's a really good question. I feel like the answer almost has to be yes. I feel like we've got so much literature now on how social media is negatively affecting everybody's life. I'm 32. Honest to God, I cannot imagine being in high school with like constantly plugged into like the crazy social media shit these days. I would blow my brains out. It sounds like the worst experience ever. And we have like more and more studies that show that like especially women that use these platforms are getting like worse images of themselves. Men, young, everybody is like getting fucked on these platforms. You know, is this so much of a negative externality that it demands some sort of regulation? Maybe. I mean, we've done it for things that have negative stuff in the past, like, you know, drugs. Obviously, things like cigarettes or alcohol are disallowed until a certain age. Do we need to take the same step with social media or go like a Chinese or a South Korean route where you say, like, you have a limited number of hours you can spend? It sounds really draconian. It sounds probably incompatible with our current U.S. understanding of freedom, but I feel like something should probably be done, yeah. Because
3 hours of video games per week would definitely hurt you.
Okay, okay, hey.
I wasn't even allowed to play. I wasn't even allowed to play video games during the week. Lucky bastard.
So next question. Sorry. You're real quick, 15 seconds. Go for it.
No, I was just going to say, I think that also can have a negative effect because we might be banning people from positive experience as well. So it really depends on how that person wants to live their life, and they have to make the decision for themselves, unfortunately. And I agree with you. I think that too many teenage women, I've made videos about this, are, massively, coming across more depression symptoms and anxiety symptoms. Yeah, and I think, but at the same time, some of those things can alleviate the pain, some of those internet, experiences. But it goes back and forth.
All right.
Nico, you were talking earlier about how basically our government, including the CIA, has overtaken some private businesses. I truly believe that DARPA and Lifespan was turned over the same day that Lifespan ended because it was deemed illegal and unconstitutional. Is the same day Facebook went live. Okay, so I believe these platforms are being controlled by our government, and therefore our government is using the phrase private to get away with things because they know that they could never get away with it if they went and said they were government. Yes. As a 21-year retired Iraq war veteran, I'm repulsed. I have had 3 Facebook accounts permanently disabled and 4 Twitter accounts for telling the truth because they don't want to hear it.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point that you brought up. I was going to bring it up, but
Thank
I
you
got
for your
cut
service.
off. So like what she's talking about is the fact that Lifespan, which is a CIA program to track people as they get older, know exactly where you are at any point, and have you actively voluntarily engage in telling everybody about your life. That stopped the day of Facebook going live, which was like February 2004, if I'm not mistaken. And then the female who was in charge of that program actually ended up in Facebook a few years later. So you're literally having ex-CIA agents during election years, it was 2016, I believe, is when she joined, going into the program, basically going into the mirror of the program that she was the head of the CIA, and then we're supposed to pretend as if these programs aren't doing, or these private, quote unquote, private companies aren't doing what the government is doing, but they're hiring all the people who are involved in the government.
So this is the root again. Yeah, we're getting what you're saying, but we're kind of. Is there anything to add because like we're right at time? And go ahead.
The thing that I have to add about just this conference in general, I think that nobody knows the exact truth because I think truth is hidden from us for personal biases, and I think that we just need to calm down a little bit. Too much testosterone.
That's good.
But I think I think that the point of this conference and the point of making YouTube videos and such should be more civil and more open to other people's ideas and not attacking other individuals for having different opinions. And I think that is the way to go forward.
I concur.
And I think, yeah, and I mean, that's coming from a moderate, which makes a lot of sense, right? So.
That's cool. And the one thing I think I can say is everybody here, it seems at least, slightly favor the fact of transparency of why you would get banned. And even Steven said he would probably vote for that law. So, I mean, that seems to be shared. So,
And antitrust laws are not strict enough. I agree.
If anybody that used to work for the government wants to sign up for my company, my email is open. I need some of that unlimited funding, so yeah, jump right on that.
That's awesome. All right, we're going to take a break.
right.
Thanks so much.
All right, so we are going to do a 10-minute sharp. So we're talking about 2:56. Please be back in your seats, and we'll get the next panel started. So 2:56. I'm sorry, 2:57. Thank you.
That was intense. That was a lot of energy for me. I need a nap, yeah.
Yeah, holy shit.
Hey everybody, commanded. Jesus commanded me to, and you know.
I didn't claim it was defense. I was just you're claiming that these verses in Deuteronomy.
Fucking accent. Accent. Apologize. Apologize. Huh. Yeah. Ouais, ouais. That's for another day.
That's walking with his hands up that I just saw.
I did recognize the
Hold up, lidt, Wenke.